He died on a highway outside Houston. He fell asleep at the wheel, crashed into a tanker truck, a flash of orange. And then he opens his eyes in a stranger's body in the middle of the desert. His mouth is filled with blood and sand. A girl he's never seen before is crying over him. And right in front of his face, golden letters flash. A tribe on the brink of extinction. Population 312. Power ranking F-. Welcome to hell. The pain comes first, sharp, as if someone had thrust a red-hot rod between his ribs and twisted it. He coughs up blood, his body twitches. A stranger's body. He realizes it immediately. The arms are too thin, the fingers are too long. The skin is dark, almost black. Above him, a dead, pale sky without a single cloud. The smell of scorching sand and camel dung hits his nostrils. 3 faces are bent over him. An old woman with blue tattoos on her chin, a boy of about 10 with a slashed cheek, and a girl. She presses a bloodied and weeps silently. Tears fall directly onto the wound. He wants to say he is alive, but only a rasp escapes his throat. And then a stranger's memory hits him like a freight train. The girl's name is Layla. She is his sister. The boy is Kareem, his cousin. Old grandmother Nazira, and he himself is now Yusuf ibn Safar, sheikh of the Banu Safar, 20 years old. And he has just died. Or rather, the one who was here before him has died. And Daniel Kane, a 34-year-old petroleum engineer from Houston. He fell asleep at the wheel on I-10 and crashed into a tanker truck. He remembered a flash and his last thought. And he opened his eyes in this body, and the golden letters are still hanging in the air. He blinks. They don't disappear. He is the only one who sees them. Layla is crying. Kareem is biting his lip. Nazira is muttering a prayer. None of them can see the writing. Daniel sits up. The pain explodes like white fire. He grits his teeth and looks around. A camp, if you can call it that. Tattered tents made of goat skins have cracked in the sun. Skinny goats with protruding ribs wander among them. Children sit in the shade, with swollen bellies and arms like sticks. They aren't playing. They're just staring ahead with empty eyes. Women by the far tent are dividing water from a wineskin, a sip for each, 1 sip for the whole day. That's what F- rank is. GDP, 4 silver dinars, for 312 people. 4 coins. In Houston, he earned $120,000 a year and considered himself to be living modestly. And these people are dying for a sip of water. Layla stares intently at his face, as if searching for something. Daniel speaks up. The words come of their own accord from someone else's memory. He asks for water and a map of the area. Layla flinches. She recoils. Then she nods and runs off toward the tents. Kareem turns to him, asks how he's feeling, calls him sheikh. There's such desperate hope in the boy's voice that Daniel's throat tightens. This child is waiting for his 20-year-old brother to stand up and save everyone. Daniel looks at his new hands, thin, weak, scratched. A fresh cut on his left palm, an old burn on his right. You won't be able to lift a drill pipe with these hands. He won't be able to dig a hole a meter deep. His body is emaciated from hunger. His muscles are atrophied. His joints ache. But his mind is working, and his mind knows something. Daniel scoops up a handful of sand. He rubs it between his fingers. He brings it up to his eyes. 8 years on drilling rigs in Texas and Saudi Arabia taught him to read rock by its color and texture. And his heart races. This sand is no ordinary sand. The grains are finer, the color is darker, and in the sun, at just the right angle, there's an oily sheen, almost imperceptible. but Daniel can see it with his eyes closed. He worked on the fields of the Permian Basin. He's seen the first signs of oil 1,000 times. And this damned hot sand beneath the dead sheikh's backside screams oil. Daniel quietly curses in English. Kareem stares at him with his mouth agape. He doesn't understand a word. Daniel waves his hand. He asks how long the tribe has been settled here. Kareem replies that it's been 3 generations, ever since our great-grandfather found the well. And the well dried up 2 months ago. Daniel nods. 3 generations. They sat on oil for 3 generations. They slept on it. They buried their dead in it. And they didn't know. How could they have known? In this world, oil is just black, stinking mud that ruins wells. No one understands what it is. But Daniel understands. Crude oil isn't a single liquid, but a cocktail of dozens of fractions. Kerosene for lamps, fuel oil for lubrication, asphalt for roads and roofs. 5 products from a single barrel. And each is worth more than gold in this world. Because there is gold here, but there is no lamp oil, no grease for axles, no roof covering that keeps out the rain. He is sitting on a treasure, a real treasure. Layla returns with water in a clay cup. Her hands are shaking. Daniel takes a sip. The water is warm and brackish, but it's water. He hands the cup back and tells her to finish the rest. Layla freezes. Her eyes widen. Yusuf never did that. Yusuf drank his share down to the last drop. He was the sheikh. It was his right. Daniel didn't know that. He simply saw his sister's chapped lips and gave her the water. Because that's what normal people do. Nazira stops muttering her prayer and stares intently at him. Something changes in her eyes, small but significant. There are no maps. Kareem explains that only merchants and the Sultanate's army have maps. The tribes have no maps. They navigate by the stars and stones. Daniel accepts this. He'll draw the map himself. Later. Right now, there are more important tasks. He asks Kareem to gather the elders. The boy runs off. Daniel looks at the golden letters again. Population 312. He closes his eyes and counts. Maybe 100 able-bodied people. Water supplies for a few days. Even less food. The well is dry. The nearest oasis is nowhere in sight, and beneath their feet lies oil they still need to reach. No drill, no metal, no tools. Just bare hands and hungry people. He opens his eyes and smiles. At the Bakken shale drilling site in North Dakota, he once extracted oil from a well everyone had written off as dry. His boss called him crazy. 2 months later, it was producing 800 barrels a day. Here it will be tougher, much tougher. But the principle is the same. Find the resource, extract it, sell it. Reinvest the profits, scale up. The elders are gathering in an hour. 7 wizened old men with dark skin and faded eyes. They squat in a semicircle and watch with poorly concealed pity. To them, he's a boy. A crazy boy who got back on his feet after a fatal wound and demanded a map first thing. Among them is Hamza, Yusuf's uncle, a large man with a heavy jaw and angry eyes. The only one who still looks strong, and the only one who looks not with pity, but with cold calculation. Daniel knows that look. It's the look of managers waiting for their boss to slip up so they can take his seat. Hamza believes he should be the sheikh. Daniel doesn't argue yet. Instead, he asks Kareem to bring a clay bowl. He scoops up that same sand with the oily sheen. He pours water into it. Nazira flinches. Water is too precious to pour it into the dirt. But she stays silent. Daniel stirs it with a stick, slowly, carefully. The water grows murky, darkens, and a thin, iridescent film rises to the surface. like a gasoline puddle in a gas station parking lot. Daniel gathers the film with his finger, brings it to the lamp's wick, and it flares up, a blue flame with a soft pop. The elders recoil. Hamza jumps to his feet. Nazira presses her hand to her lips. Kareem's mouth drops open. Daniel lets the flame die out. Then he speaks, quietly, calmly, without fanfare. Beneath their camp lies a fire that burns on its own. There is enough of it to buy all of Al-Darun. He needs 30 men, ropes, and a month's time. In a year, not a single child of Banu Safar will go to bed hungry. Silence. Absolute. Even the goats fall silent. The elders watch the blue smoke curling from his finger. Hamza slowly sits back down. His face remains unchanged, but something new flashes in his eyes. Not faith. Calculation. If the boy has gone mad, he will die soon, and the seat will be vacant. And if not, then it is advantageous to stand beside such a sheikh. Nazira is the first to kneel, an old woman who still remembers grandfather Yusuf. She says she believes him, that she is old and has seen many miracles in the desert, but she has never seen anything like this. One by one, the elders bow their heads. Not all of them. Hamza merely nods briefly, but that's enough for now. Daniel dismisses the council. Kareem doesn't leave. He sits nearby and watches the children gaze at the magician. Daniel asks if he can run fast. Kareem replies that he's the fastest in the tribe. Daniel says, "Good, you'll be my legs. I speak, you run." Kareem breaks into a smile, the first smile Daniel has seen in this camp. Then he asks what a fire is that burns on its own. It's pointless to explain hydrocarbons to a boy. Daniel says that long, long ago, huge trees and animals lived underground. Then they died. The earth squeezed them so hard that they turned into a black liquid. This liquid burns. And if you collect and separate it properly, you can make light for lamps from it, oil for wheels, stone for roads. Kareem thinks for a moment and says it looks like the blood of shaitan. That's what the old men call the black mud that oozes from the ground. Daniel nods. Let it be the blood of shaitan. The main thing is that it burns. In the evening, he lies in Yusuf's tent, now his tent. Stars are visible through the holes in the goatskin. He's never seen stars like these before, not in Texas, not in Saudi Arabia. The sky is closer here, brighter, more menacing. Behind the partition, Layla breathes quietly. She isn't asleep. He hears her tossing and turning. She knows he's changed. She was the first to notice. His gaze, his voice, the way he speaks. Yusuf was quiet and timid. Daniel speaks like a man accustomed to commanding teams. Yusuf never gave away his water. Daniel gave his without a second thought. Yusuf was afraid of Uncle Hamza. Daniel looks at Hamza as a problem to be solved. She senses this and remains silent. Because answer. Daniel closes his eyes. The golden letters flash again. Population 312. GDP 4 dinars. Rank F-. Children with swollen bellies. Women sharing a sip of water. Men dying from wounds and fever. Somewhere in another world that no longer exists, Daniel's mother still doesn't know her son is dead. His sister hasn't received the call yet. His pickup is still burning on the side of the road. Or maybe not. Or maybe a minute has passed. Or a year. He doesn't know, and he can't find out. The only thing he can do is breathe in this body, think with this brain, work with these weak, unfamiliar hands. 312 people. All right. Daniel opens his eyes. He looks at the stars through a hole in the tent and begins to plan. The first task, water. Without water, everything else is pointless. Oil can wait. Water first. The well dried up 2 months ago. But did it really dry up? Or maybe it just became too shallow for the primitive pit they dug. Groundwater in the desert doesn't disappear. It goes deeper. You have to go after it, with the right tools and calculations. He calls for Kareem, but the boy is already asleep at the entrance, curled up on a goat skin. Daniel doesn't wake him. Morning. It will all begin in the morning. He closes his eyes again. The wound throbs. His body is weak, hungry, and foreign, but his mind is already sketching out plans. A piston pump made of camel skin, a wooden casing for the well, a filter made of charcoal and cloth. He falls asleep with the blueprints under his eyelids, and his final thought is neither a prayer nor a curse. It is simple and clear, like a formula for reservoir pressure. 4 dinars, 312 men, dead goats and torn tents. Grade F-. Fine. It's been worse. At Bakken Shale, they gave him a decommissioned well and a crew of alcoholics. 6 months later, they were pumping oil. It'll be the same here, only the stakes are higher. At Bakken Shale, money was at stake. Here, lives are. The morning began with a scream. Daniel jumped up and immediately doubled over in pain. The wound reminded him of itself with a hot flash. A woman was screaming behind the tent wall. He made his way outside. The sun hadn't risen above the horizon yet, but the heat was already oppressive. A crowd had gathered by the farthest tent. The woman was kneeling and rocking back and forth. She was holding a child in her arms, a boy of about 3. His eyes were rolled back. His lips were white. His stomach was swollen. Daniel approached. He bent down. He touched the child's forehead. It was hot as a frying pan. He turned to Nazira and asked what was wrong with the boy. The old woman answered with a single word: stomach. Daniel understood. Dysentery. Dirty water, or a lack of water altogether. The child was dying from dehydration and an intestinal infection. In Houston, they would have saved him in 2 hours, an IV, antibiotics, an electrolyte solution. Here, Daniel had none of that. He ordered them to bring clean water, the cleanest they could find, and salt, and honey, if they had even a spoonful. Layla brought it. Daniel mixed the water with a pinch of salt and a drop of honey, a primitive oral rehydration solution. He'd seen field medics in Saudi Arabia do this for workers who'd suffered heat stroke. He made the mother give the child a sip every few minutes, no more. Otherwise, he'd throw up. The mother looked at him as if he were a prophet. He wasn't a prophet. He was an engineer who remembered the basics of first aid from corporate training. The child survived. By evening, the fever had broken. The boy opened his eyes and asked for food. The mother kissed Daniel's hands. He pulled them away, awkward, abrupt. He wasn't used to this. On the rig, they'd pat a rescued colleague on the shoulder and buy him a beer. Here, they kissed his hands. A different world, literally. Daniel gathered Kareem and 4 sturdy men. He explained the task. They needed a well, a real well, not that 2 meters deep that had dried up, but a deep vertical shaft with a wooden casing. The men exchanged glances. One of them, named Rashid, asked where to dig. Daniel closed his eyes. The system responded instantly. E-rank geological survey. In his mind's eye, the earth became translucent, like an X-ray. He saw the layers: sand, clay, sand again, and there, at a depth of about 30 meters, a dark lens, an aquifer, not huge, but sufficient. There was water. It hadn't gone anywhere. It had just gone deeper, just as he'd suspected. Daniel opened his eyes and pointed to a spot 80 paces east of the camp. Here. Dig here. Rashid asked why exactly here. Daniel replied that he could sense the water. It wasn't exactly a lie. The system really did give him something like a sixth sense, but he wasn't going to explain the golden letters before his eyes. Let them think the young sheikh possessed a gift. In the desert, people believe in gifts. It's easier that way. They dug all day. Daniel couldn't dig himself. Yusuf's body wouldn't have lasted an hour. He sat on a rock next to the pit and directed them. He explained how to build the walls, how to reinforce the soil, how to tell by the color of the soil that the water table is close. The men listened, at first with skepticism, then with interest. Daniel spoke confidently and precisely, not like a 20-year-old boy, like an engineer with 8 years of experience. Hamza came to the pit on the second day. He stood at the edge. He looked down, 4 meters deep, not a drop of water. He smirked and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "A boy is digging a grave for the tribe, wasting people's strength on an empty hole in the sand. They should be leading the caravan to the oasis, not playing mole." Several men exchanged glances. Hamza was no fool. He hit the nail on the head. Every day without water weakened Daniel's position. Every fruitless day strengthened Hamza. Daniel didn't argue. He looked up at Hamza and said one sentence. "In 3 days, there will be water here. If there isn't, I'll give you the sheikh's seal." Silence. Even the diggers stopped. Hamza narrowed his eyes. Then he nodded slowly. "I accept." And he left. Kareem ran up to Daniel. The boy's eyes were wide with fear. He asked why the sheikh had said that. What if there was no water? Daniel looked at him and replied that there would be water, because you could see it. It was down there, 30 meters. But we wouldn't be able to dig 30 meters in 3 days. We'll do something smarter. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat by the light of an oil lamp and thought. 30 meters by hand in 3 days is impossible, even with 20 diggers. So we need a different approach. Not digging, drilling. Using a primitive percussion method, rope percussion drilling, the oldest technology on Earth. The Chinese used it 3,000 years ago. The principle is simple. A heavy, pointed weight on a rope. You lift it, you drop it. It hammers the rock. Lift it again, drop it again, slowly, but surely. For this, you need a heavy stone, a rope, and a wooden frame. There are plenty of stones in the desert. There are ropes, wood. Wood is the problem. Daniel remembered seeing broken poles from an old palanquin near one of the tents, long, sturdy, made of some kind of local hardwood. He nudged Kareem. The boy jumped up instantly, a desert habit. Daniel explained what was needed. 4 long poles, a flat, heavy stone, 3 coils of rope, and, most importantly, a piece of iron. Any piece. An old knife, a spearhead, a scrap, anything. The iron was needed for the tip. Kareem left and returned an hour later. He found the poles. He found the stone. He brought the ropes. And here was the iron. He handed Daniel a rusty sickle, the only piece of iron in the camp that no one had used. Daniel turned the sickle over in his hands. The steel was lousy, but it would do for the tip. He called for Rashid. It turned out he was also a blacksmith, or rather, he knew how to strike hot metal with a hammer. That was enough. Daniel explained what was needed. Flatten the sickle. Make it into a flat chisel the width of a palm. Sharpen the edge. Weld it to a stone. Rashid listened. He nodded. He lit a small forge made of stones and camel dung. By dawn, the chisel was ready. Rough, crooked, but sharp. Dawn of the 3rd day, Daniel gathered the men at the pit. Over the previous 2 days, they had dug down 6 meters. Further down, the soil became denser, clay. Digging with shovels was useless. Daniel set up a frame of poles, a tripod. He tied a stone with an iron chisel to a rope. He looped the rope over the top of the tripod. He showed them how to work. 2 men pull the rope. The stone rises 2 meters. They let go. The stone falls. The chisel strikes the clay. They pull again. They drop it again, rhythmically, monotonously, blow after blow. Hamza came to watch. He stood silently, arms crossed over his chest. Half the tribe had gathered around the pit. Women, children, elders, everyone watched. Blow, blow, blow. The stone rose and fell. The clay crumbled and was scooped out with a leather bucket. 1 meter, 2, 3. The sun crept across the sky. The heat was oppressive. Daniel rotated the crews every hour. 5 men dug, 5 rest. By noon they had gone another 4 meters, 10 meters from the surface. The soil had changed. The clay had become damp. Daniel sensed it before he saw it. The system highlighted the water table more brightly, closer. He told them to dig more carefully, slower. Another 2 meters, 1 more. And at a depth of 13 meters, the pickaxe sank through. The rope tugged. The man at the gate shouted that the rock had given way. Daniel stepped to the edge and looked down. Water was rising from the bottom of the pit. Slowly, murky, brown. But it was water. Real, fresh water from the aquifer. It seeped from the walls, filled the bottom, rose centimeter by centimeter. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Then the camp erupted. The women screamed. The children rushed to the pit. The men patted each other on the back. Old Nazira sank to her knees again. She was crying, openly, unashamedly. The last time she had seen water in the well was 4 months ago. Layla stood to the side. She wasn't screaming or crying. She was looking at Daniel, intently, scrutinizingly, as if trying to understand who this man in her brother's body was. Daniel caught her gaze, and for a second he felt uneasy, because there was no joy in Layla's eyes. There was gratitude, and there was fear. Hamza walked over to the pit. He looked down, for a long time. Then he turned to Daniel. His face was inscrutable. He said there was water, and that he acknowledged it. The young sheikh had kept his word. But a single pit of murky water was not yet salvation. Daniel nodded. He agreed. It's a start. Not the end, but a start. Hamza paused. Then he asked the question that had been hanging in the air ever since Daniel lit the oil slick. How do you know this boy? You grew up in this camp. You've never left the desert. How do you know how to find water? How do you know about fire in the sand? Who taught you? Daniel was ready for this question. He replied that when he was lying wounded and dying, he had a dream. In that dream, the spirit of an ancestor came to him, the founder of the Safar clan, and showed him things, taught him, commanded him to raise the tribe from the dust. Daniel hated this lie. Every word felt like a stone in his throat. But the truth was impossible. What could he say? I am not your sheikh. I am a dead American. Your Yusuf is dead, and I have taken his body. They would have killed him, or banished him, which is the same thing in the desert. Hamza listened. He was silent. Then he said that the spirits do not come to the weak. If the spirit had chosen Yusuf, it meant there was a strength in the boy that Hamza hadn't seen. He didn't say he believed it. He said he would wait and see. That was better than Daniel had expected. He spent the next few days fixing up the well. He reinforced the walls with wooden planks. He built a primitive piston pump, a cylinder made from a hollowed-out tree trunk, a piston made of wood covered with camel skin, a handle. The design was as simple as a piece of junk, but it worked. Water rose to the top without buckets or ropes. The women no longer stood in line for a sip. There was enough water for drinking, for cooking, for washing. For the first time in 4 months, the children of Banu Safar drank their fill. On the first evening after the pump was put into operation, Layla washed her hair. Daniel happened to see this. She was standing behind the tent, pouring water over her head from a clay jug, slowly, carefully, as if she were afraid the water would run out. And she was crying, quietly, silently, just like when he had woken up. Daniel turned away and left. A lump formed in his throat. He couldn't tell her who he was. couldn't explain why he had changed, couldn't comfort her. The only thing he could do was make sure she never cried from thirst again. On the 10th day, Daniel took care of hygiene. He gathered the tribe. He explained the new rules. The outhouses would now be set aside from the camp, no closer than 100 paces. Wash hands before eating. Boil drinking water, always. No exceptions. The elders looked at him as if he were mad. Why spoil the water with fire? It's clean as it is. Daniel didn't bother explaining about bacteria. He said that little evil spirits lived in the water and caused stomach sickness. Fire kills them. Nazira nodded. She knew about the evil spirits. Her mother had told her. The others took it with less enthusiasm, but Daniel was the sheikh. His word was law, even if it was fragile. A week after the new rules were introduced, not a single child had an upset stomach. For the first time in living memory, according to the elders. Nazira declared it a miracle. Daniel said nothing. It wasn't a miracle. It was basic sanitation. 19th century standards, but in a world where people drank from puddles next to which they defecated. Even that changed everything. The system updated the data. Population 312. No losses in 10 days, for the first time. GDP was still 4 dinars, but a small green upward arrow had appeared next to the number. Daniel smiled. A green arrow, just like on a stock market chart. He looked at the camp, at the children playing by the well, at the women washing clothes, at the men repairing the tents. He had built all of this in 10 days. The well, the pump, clean water, hygiene rules. 10 days. 312 people were still alive. Now he could think about oil. Oil. Daniel thought about it every spare moment. The well had given the tribe water. Hygiene had stopped the diseases. But there was still not enough food. The goats were only producing milk intermittently. The millet supplies were dwindling. In a month, the tribe would start starving again. They needed goods to sell. They needed income. They needed oil. He activated the geological survey. He closed his eyes. The system displayed an underground map before him. At a depth of 18 meters lay a reservoir. Dark, dense, vast. The oil-bearing horizon stretched for hundreds of meters in every direction. Daniel estimated the volume. Even by the most conservative estimates, it was tens of thousands of barrels, maybe hundreds of thousands. In a world where no one knew what to do with oil, it was worth nothing. But Daniel knew, and that changed everything. The problem was the depth, 18 meters. He drilled the well down to 13, and that had taken 3 days. An oil well would require more, deeper, harder rock. And he needed a real drill, not a stone on a rope, an iron drill, a rotary one, with a bit that cuts through the rock rather than it. There was no iron in the camp. That one sickle had been used for the well bit. We need a blacksmith, a real blacksmith, with a supply of metal. Daniel called for Karim. He asked where the nearest trade route was. Karim replied that 2 days' journey to the north lay a small caravan route from Al-Darun to Ligu. Merchants traveled along it once every 2 or 3 weeks. Daniel asked if there were any blacksmiths among them. Karim shrugged his shoulders. Sometimes. Wandering blacksmiths travel with the caravans and repair utensils in exchange for food. Daniel made a decision. He sent Rashid and 2 young men to the route. 3 goats went with them, the tribe's only currency. The task was simple. Find a caravan, find a blacksmith, buy iron. Any iron. Scrap, rods, offcuts, as much as they could carry. And if possible, hire a blacksmith for a month's work. Rashid left at dawn. Daniel watched as the 3 figures faded into the haze. 3 goats for iron. If Rashid returned empty-handed, the tribe would lose both the goats and the time. Hamza stood nearby, silent. He watched the goats leave. 3 goats meant milk for 10 children for a month. He didn't say a word, but Daniel felt his gaze like a burn on the back of his neck. While Rashid was on his way, Daniel didn't sit idly by. He set about preparing for the drilling. He needed a derrick, the simplest kind, 4 posts and a crossbeam. For that, he needed wood. There aren't many trees in the desert, but there are some. Karim knew where a grove of dry acacia trees grew, a half-day's journey to the south. Daniel sent a crew of 8 men there with ropes and a single axe. 2 days later, they returned. They dragged 6 thick trunks, each 4 meters long. Daniel examined the wood. Acacia, hard, dense, perfect. He began marking out the structure. 4 legs, tied together at the top, a crossbar for the block. Daniel drew with a stick in the sand and explained to Rashidov's assistant how to tie the knots, which angles to keep the load, where to place the struts. The man listened, nodded, did as he was told. By the end of the 3rd day, the tower stood. Crooked, wobbly, but it stood. 4 meters high, with a rope pulley at the top. Daniel walked around it. He tugged at every knot, gave it a shove with his shoulder. The structure creaked, but didn't budge. It'll do. On the 5th day, Rashid returned. Daniel heard shouts and stepped out of the tent. Rashid was walking in front. Behind him were his 2 companions. All 3 were carrying heavy bundles on their shoulders. There were no goats, but there was metal. Rashid tossed a bundle at Daniel's feet and unwrapped it. 4 iron rods, each about a foot long, 2 pieces of a broken plow, a handful of nails, and a miracle. A copper cauldron. A large one, 30 liters, with thick walls and a lid. Daniel stared at the cauldron. He asked where it came from. Rashid explained. A caravan was carrying the cauldron to a merchant in Liga, but the merchant canceled the order. The trader wanted to get rid of the extra cargo. Rashid offered 2 goats. The trader agreed. A 3rd goat went toward the iron. Daniel lifted the cauldron. Heavy, pure copper, no cracks. This cauldron was worth more than the entire camp, because Daniel was going to turn this cauldron into a distillation still. But that was for later. First, the well. He called Rashid over to the forge, explained what was needed. A drill bit, flat, wide, with a cutting edge, and drill rods, long rods that connect to each other and transmit rotation from the surface to the bit at depth. Rashid listened. He scratched the back of his head. He said he'd never done anything like this before. Daniel replied that neither had he, but they'd figure it out. For 3 days, Rashid hammered away. Daniel stood nearby and directed him. The forge was small. The heat was weak. The iron was hard to bend. But Rashid was as stubborn as an ox. He hammered from dawn to dusk. Sparks flew. Sweat poured down in streams. Nails and plow fragments turned into a crude chisel 2 palms wide. The rods became bars with primitive joints. There was no threading. The rods were inserted into one another and secured with leather straps. Unreliable, but it should be enough for 18 meters. On the morning of the 7th day after Rashid's return, Daniel began drilling. The rig stood 40 paces north of the camp. The system indicated that the formation was closest to the surface here. The drill bit was suspended on a rope via a pulley. 4 men turned the winch. The drill bit rotated, slowly, with a grinding sound, biting into the sand and clay. The first 3 meters went quickly. Sand, loose, light. Then the clay began. Dense, sticky. The drill bit got stuck. The men pulled on the winch and cursed. Daniel ordered them to pour water into the borehole, a little, to soften the clay. It helped. The speed dropped, but the drilling continued. 1 meter a day, sometimes 1.5 meters. Daniel counted the days. He counted the meters. He counted the food supplies. Everything added up to the last bit. If the oil was at 18 meters, they'd get there in 12 to 14 days. There'd be enough food, enough water. If the layer was deeper, if the system was wrong, if the drill bit broke, then it would all be over. On the 10th day of drilling, the drill bit broke. It cracked along the seam. Rashid spat into the sand and said the iron was crap. Daniel knew the iron was crap. He'd known it from the very beginning, but there was no other option. He sat by the well and looked at the debris. 15 meters drilled, 3 left, 3 meters to the oil, and a broken drill bit. Hamza came over. He looked at the debris. He didn't say a word. He turned and walked away. But Daniel saw his smirk. Karim sat nearby, quiet, frightened. He asked what to do. Daniel closed his eyes. He thought. He opened them. He remembered. In Saudi Arabia, at one of their sites, a bit had snapped at a depth of 200 meters. They retrieved the broken piece and reforged it right on the site. Field repair. He turned to Rashid and said, "Reforge. Gather both pieces. Weld them back together. Make it longer and thicker. Not a wide bit, but a narrow one. We'll lose some speed, but gain in strength. 3 meters with a narrow bit is 4 days. We can handle it." Rashid nodded. He lit the forge. He worked all night. By morning, the new bit was ready. Twice as long as the old one, but stronger. Drilling continued. 3 meters in 4 days, just as Daniel had calculated. On the 14th day of drilling, on the 26th day since Daniel's awakening in this world, at a depth of 18 meters, the drill bit hit a void, and a fountain gushed from the well. Black liquid, thick, heavy, with a pungent odor. It spurted 3 meters up from the shaft. It splashed the derrick. It splashed the men at the gate. It splashed Daniel, who was standing too close. Oil. He stood there with a black face and laughed. For the first time in 26 days. He laughed like a madman. The tribe didn't understand. They stared at the black fountain in horror. The blood of Shaitan. A curse. Some women grabbed their children and ran. The elders backed away. Even Rashid, who was forging a chisel, turned pale. Only Nazira stood calmly. She looked at the fountain and remembered how, 10 days ago, a thin film had ignited with a blue flame on the sheikh's finger. She turned to the tribe and shouted, "This is not a curse. It is a gift. The sheikh promised. The sheikh delivered." The tribe froze. Daniel wiped his face. He looked at his blackened hands. He looked at the fountain, which had already weakened and turned into a steady stream. The pressure had stabilized. The well was working. He turned to the tribe. He spoke calmly. "This is a fire that burns on its own. Remember, now it is ours." Golden letters flashed before his eyes. Power ranking upgraded. F-, F. One letter. A small step. But Daniel knew that this step would change everything. There was oil. Now, it had to be turned into money. Crude oil was worth nothing in this world. A black, stinking liquid that people feared and considered a curse. But Daniel knew that hidden within this liquid were 5 commodities: kerosene, fuel oil, naphtha, bitumen, and diesel. Each of them solved a problem worth its weight in gold. Kerosene burned brightly and cleanly, better than any oil. Fuel oil lubricated wagon axles and mechanisms. Bitumen covered roofs and kept water out. Legroin cleaned fabrics and dissolved resin. Diesel burned hotter than wood. 5 commodities from a single barrel. And for that, you a distillation still. Daniel took out a copper kettle. He set it on some stones. He called Rashid. He explained the principle. Oil is heated in the cauldron. Different fractions boil at different temperatures. The lightest ones evaporate first. The vapor travels through a tube into a condenser. The condenser is a second vessel filled with water through which the tube passes. The vapor cools. It turns into a liquid. This liquid is kerosene. When the temperature rises above the next fraction begins to boil, you collect it separately, and so on. Rashid listened and nodded slowly. He understood the principle, but where to get a tube? A copper tube, a long one, a thin one that won't leak. Daniel thought for a moment. There was no tube, but there was a second piece of the plow. Iron. Rashid could hammer it into a sheet, roll the sheet into a tube, seal the seams with copper from the scraps. Rough, primitive, but it would be enough for the first distillation. Rashid spent 3 days hammering the tube. Meanwhile, Daniel was solving another problem, a cooler. He needed a vessel for cooling, a large one, watertight, clay. He called for Layla. He asked if anyone in the tribe knew how to work with clay. Layla replied that old Fatima made pots. Daniel asked for her to be brought to him. Fatima turned out to be a slight woman in her 50s with the strong hands of a potter. Daniel explained that he needed a large clay basin, wide, deep, with a hole in the side for the pipe. Fatima nodded. 2 days later, the basin was ready, fired over a bonfire, slightly crooked but watertight. Daniel assembled the setup, a cauldron on stones. The lid was secured with leather straps. An iron pipe protruded from the lid. The pipe ran downward and entered the clay basin filled with water. From the other end of the basin, the pipe emerged and ended above a clay jug. The first distillation. Daniel poured 3 buckets of crude oil into the cauldron. He lit a fire under the stones. The tribe gathered around. Everyone. 312 people. Even Hamza. The fire heated the cauldron. 1 minute. 2. 5. The crude oil began to bubble. Steam rose from the tube, foul-smelling, thick. The people recoiled. Daniel didn't move. He waited. The steam traveled through the tube into the condenser. The water in the basin heated up. The steam cooled. And a liquid began to drip from the end of the tube. Clear, yellowish, with a sharp odor. Kerosene. The first kerosene in the history of Ashraf. Daniel held out a jug, drop by drop, slowly. In an hour, half a jug had filled up. He took a clay bowl, poured a finger's width of kerosene into it, rolled a wick from a strip of cloth, dipped it into the kerosene, lit it. The flame was steady, bright, golden. No soot, no smell of burnt grease. Cleaner and brighter than any oil lamp, 10 times brighter. Daniel raised the bowl above his head. The tribe watched. In the gathering twilight, the flame of the kerosene lamp lit up their faces. Frightened, surprised, mesmerized. Daniel turns to Nazira. He walked up to her, held out the lamp, told her it was for her, so she could see at night, so the light wouldn't end with sunset. Nazira took the lamp with trembling hands. She looked at the flame the way children look at the first snow. Then she pressed the lamp to her chest and wept. Quietly, like Layla. Silently, just tears running down her cheeks. She said that now she could see the portrait of her daughter, a small drawing on a piece of leather that her daughter had made before she died 20 years ago. She had kept it all these years, but after sunset she couldn't make out the face. The oil lamp gave off too dim a light. But now she could. Daniel turned away. He swallowed. The same lump was in his throat as when he'd seen Layla with the water. He's an engineer. He makes things. He doesn't perform miracles. But for these people, the kerosene lamp was a miracle. Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel transported 20 buckets of oil. He received 5 jugs of kerosene, 2 jugs of fuel oil, and a thick black residue at the bottom of the kettle, bitumen. He collected the bitumen in a separate pot. Then he showed the men how to use it to cover the roof of the tent. The bitumen hardened in the sun. It formed a thick black crust. waterproof, durable. When a rare winter storm struck a week later, the water rolled off Nazira's tent like water off a duck's back. All the other tents were soaked through. People sat in the mud, shivering. Nazira sat in the dry and drank tea by the light of a kerosene lamp. The next day, 8 families came to Daniel asking him to cover their tents as well. Daniel used the fuel oil himself. He greased the gate hinge by the well. He lubricated the hinges on the drilling rig frame. The mechanisms stopped creaking. They started working more smoothly. The men noticed. They asked for fuel oil for the wagon axles. Daniel gave it to them. The wagons ran quieter and faster. 5 items, from a single barrel. Each solved a specific problem for a specific person. Kerosene for Nazira, bitumen for the tents, fuel oil for the carts. It wasn't a business plan. It was a demonstration. Daniel wasn't showing the tribe what oil could give the world. He was showing what oil could give them, personally. To each one, Karim followed him like a shadow. The boy memorized everything: how to light the furnace, how to control the temperature, how to distinguish kerosene from ligroin by smell. Daniel taught him patiently, without irritation. Karim was smart, quick, eager for knowledge. In another world, he would have made an excellent engineer. In this world, he would become the sheikh's right-hand man. A month after the first distillation, Daniel had a stock of 20 jugs of kerosene, enough to start trading. He called Karim and Rashid. He explained the plan. Rashid and 2 men would go with the caravan to the trade route. They would take 10 jugs of kerosene with them. They would find a merchant. They would show him how the kerosene burns, and they would sell it. Daniel set the price himself, 2 silver dinars per jug. Rashid whistled. A jug of olive oil cost half a dinar. Daniel was asking 4 times as much for a liquid no one knew anything about. Daniel explained. Kerosene burns 10 times brighter than oil. It burns 5 times longer. It doesn't smoke. It doesn't stink. 1 jug of kerosene replaces 4 jugs of oil. 2 dinars isn't expensive. It's fair. Rashid thought. He nodded. He left with the caravan. 6 days later, he returned, empty-handed, without jugs, with a purse on his belt. 20 silver dinars. All 10 jugs sold. The merchant tried lighting the kerosene. He saw the flame and bought everything. No haggling. Asked for more. 100 jugs by next month. Daniel stood there holding a silver dinar in his hand. Small, heavy, with Arabic script on one side and the silhouette of a falcon on the other. 20 dinars. The tribe's GDP had just grown 5-fold in a single day. The system updated the data. GDP, 24 dinars. The green arrow flashed twice. 100 jugs a month. Daniel did the math. 1 distillation cube yielded 5 jugs of kerosene a day when running continuously. That's 30 days. 150 jugs, with a reserve. But continuous operation meant a continuous fire, a continuous supply of oil, continuous cooling. We need people. We need organization. Daniel divided the men into crews, 3 shifts of 4 men each. The first shift pumps oil from the well. The second operates the distillation cube. The third rests. Rotation every 6 hours, just like on an oil rig in North Dakota. The men didn't understand why. They were used to working from dawn to dusk. Not in shifts, Daniel explained. A tired person makes mistakes. A mistake with boiling oil means a fire. A fire means death. That's why we have shifts. They understood. The first week was chaotic. People were confused. They didn't know when to show up. They forgot to refill the water in the cooler. They overheated the boiler twice. Once the oil caught fire. A small fire. Daniel put it out with sand. He burned his hand, not badly, but enough to get the point. Control is needed. We need someone to keep an eye on things. Not him. He can't stand by the still around the clock. He chose Kareem. The boy was 10 years old, but he was smarter than most of the adult men in the camp. He remembered everything the first time. Daniel made him the distillation master. It sounded grand. In practice, it meant that Kareem sat by the still and monitored the temperature. He touched the kettle with his hand. If it was too hot, he shouted to turn down the fire. If it cooled, he shouted to add more. Primitive, but it worked. By the end of the second week, production had stabilized. 5 jugs of kerosene a day, like clockwork. Daniel turned his attention to something else. Soap. He remembered the process from his high school chemistry class. Fat plus lye equals soap. They had fat, goat, mutton, camel. Lye can be made from ash. Wood ash is mixed with water. It's left to steep, filtered through a cloth. The result is lye. Caustic, dangerous to the skin. But if you mix it with melted fat and boil it for several hours, then let it cool, you get soap. Rough, smelly, but soap. He put Layla to work on it, explained the process. Layla listened attentively, didn't interrupt. She didn't ask any stupid questions. She asked only one. Why? Daniel answered. Soap kills disease. Washed hands don't spread germs. A washed body doesn't rot. Soap saves more lives than a saber. Layla nodded. She left. 3 days later, she brought him a piece of something grayish-yellow, shapeless. It smelled of burnt fat and lye. Soap. The first soap in the history of Banu Safar. Daniel took a piece, wet it, rubbed his palms together. Foam. Sparse, a bit dirty, but foam. He smiled. Layla looked at his smile, and for a second, just a second, she smiled back, then turned away, quickly, as if frightened by her own smile. He made soap a mandatory camp rule. Wash your hands before eating. Wash your hands after using the outhouse. Wash your body once every 3 days. Soap is issued to every family. Nazira announced that soap is a sacred gift from the sheikh. Daniel didn't argue. A sacred gift is a sacred gift. The main thing is that they wash. By the end of the first month of trading, Rashid had made 3 trips to the highway. He sold 30 jugs of kerosene, 60 dinars. With the money he made, Daniel bought cloth, grain, more iron, and 3 goats to replace the ones he'd sold. The tribe ate their fill for the first time in 2 years. The children stopped sitting around with empty stares. They played, they ran, they fought over sticks. Normal children. Daniel watched them and thought of his sister in Houston. Emily, 26 years old. She worked as an elementary school teacher. She loved coffee with cinnamon and Stephen King novels. He used to send her $2,000 a month. Now he doesn't. Now she thinks he's dead, or knows he's dead. A pickup truck on the shoulder of I-10, an orange flash. He clenched his teeth and went back to work. The first problems came at the start of the second month. The merchant's caravan that had bought the first jugs returned. Not alone. 2 men on camels had come with him, in expensive robes, with sabers at their belts. Merchants from Al-Darun. They wanted to see the sheikh. Daniel received them at the entrance to his tent. A new tent, coated with bitumen, spacious. Kareem stood nearby, Rashid behind him. The merchants inspected the camp, the drilling rig, the distillation cube, the kerosene jugs. Their eyes gleamed. The senior merchant introduced himself as Faisal. He was polite. He was smiling. He offered Daniel a deal. Faisal buys all the kerosene, everything the tribe produces, a monopoly. 1 dinar per jug. In return, Faisal provides protection on the trade routes and supplies the tribe with food and cloth at fair prices. Daniel listened, nodded, calculated. 1 dinar per jug, half the current price, a monopoly purchase tied to a single buyer. control over food supplies. A classic scheme. Buy up the resource on the cheap, get them hooked, then dictate the terms. Daniel had seen this dozens of times in the oil industry. Big companies often squeezed out small contractors. He politely declined, said he appreciated the offer, but preferred to trade with different buyers, at market price. Faisal stopped smiling, asked if the young sheikh wasn't afraid that the road through the desert was dangerous, that caravans go missing, that bandits spare no one. Daniel understood the threat. He looked Faisal in the eye. He replied that the road was indeed dangerous, for everyone, including those who threaten the one who possesses the liquid that burns. Faisal fell silent. He looked at the jugs, at the drilling rig, at the men with spears standing around the perimeter of the camp. There were only 8 of them, with curved spears and no armor. Faisal smirked. He stood up. He said he would convey the sheikh's reply to his masters in Al-Darun. And he left. Daniel watched him go. Then he turned to Rashid. He said, "We need guards, real ones, not 8 old men with sticks. 30 young men, with sabers, with spears, with bows. We need weapons, and we need to teach people how to fight." Rashid asked where we'd get the sabers. Daniel replied, "We'll buy them, with the money from the kerosene. The first profits won't go toward food, on weapons." Rashid nodded, but there was doubt in his eyes. Hamza, who had heard the whole conversation, approached. For the first time in 2 weeks, he spoke to Daniel on his own initiative. He said the boy was finally talking sense. Weapons were the right move. He would train the young men himself. He's a warrior. He knows how. Daniel looked at Hamza. Big, strong, the only real fighter in the tribe, and an enemy, or a former enemy, or a future ally. Daniel held out his hand. He said, "Teach them." Hamza shook his hand, firmly, until it hurt. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was a contract. Hamza got what he wanted, power over the warriors, control over the force. Daniel got an army. Both knew this was a temporary alliance. But a temporary alliance is better than open hostility. That night, Daniel lay on his back and stared at the ceiling. A new ceiling. Goat skin covered in bitumen. It didn't leak. A kerosene lamp burned nearby, a small one, made from a clay bowl and a rag wick. Yellow light fell on the walls, and on Layla, sleeping nearby behind the partition. She was breathing evenly, asleep. The system displayed updated data. Population 312. GDP 84 dinars. Rank F. 84 dinars. Compared to 4 on the first day. A 20-fold increase in 2 months. In absolute terms, it's nothing. 84 dinars is the price of a single good camel. But the trend is right. The curve is going up. The problem is that the curve attracts attention. Faisal will return, or he won't return, but will send those who don't haggle. Time is short. We need to grow faster. The 4th month. The population has grown to 340. 28 people came on their own, refugees from neighboring tribes, families who heard that Banu Safar has water and food, and a strange young sheikh who heals children and makes fire from mud. Daniel took them all in. He found a job for everyone. He sent the men to Rashid or to Hamza, the women to Layla at the soap factory or to Fatima at the pottery workshop, the children to the makeshift school that Layla ran in the evenings. Letters, arithmetic, the basics. Hamza was working. Daniel watched and had to admit it. His uncle knew his stuff. In a month, he turned 15 skinny lads into something vaguely resembling fighters. They knew how to hold a spear, how to move in formation, cover each other with shields. The shields were wooden, covered in leather. Spears with iron tips that Rashid had forged from purchased metal. There were only 5 sabers so far. 3 were bought from a traveling merchant. Hamza brought 2 of his own, old, nicked, but sharp. Daniel bought 10 more bows from a passing caravan. Hamza selected the 10 best archers and drilled them every day, at dawn and at dusk. Arrows flew at targets made of goat skins stuffed with sand. First they missed, then closer, then right on target. Hamza didn't praise them. He beat their hands with a stick for every miss. Daniel didn't interfere. This was Hamza's world, a world of strength and sticks. Daniel understood. In the 5th month, the first real threat arrived. The Banu Gurab, a neighboring tribe, 3 times the size of the Safar. 1,000 men, 200 of them warriors. Their sheikh, Malik ibn Gurab, sent a messenger. The messenger was young, arrogant. He rode into the camp on horseback, alone, unarmed. It was an insult. To arrive alone meant showing you were not afraid, that you considered the hosts weak. The messenger delivered Malik's words. The Banu Safar are sitting on land that belongs to the Banu Gurab by right of blood and bone. The black well is Gurab's property. If Yusuf does not want war, he will hand over the well and half of what he has extracted from it. And he will pay tribute, 10 jugs of kerosene a month. Daniel listened, calmly. Then he asked the envoy one thing. When Banu Safar was dying of thirst 4 months ago, when the children lay with swollen bellies, when the old people were falling from fever, where was Banu Gurab? The messenger remained silent. Daniel continued. Banu Gurab was nearby, 2 days' journey away, with water, with food, with weapons. And they didn't send a single drop, not a crumb. The land belongs to no one by right of blood. The land belongs to whoever brings it to life. Tell Malik that. The messenger left. Hamza approached Daniel. He said the boy had just declared war. Daniel replied that Malik had declared war. He had merely refused to surrender. Hamza smiled. For the first time ever, his smile wasn't hostile. It was friendly. He said Malik would attack, in a week, maybe 2, with cavalry. 150 horsemen. Safar had 15 fighters and 10 archers. No walls, no fortifications. He asked if the sheikh had a plan. Daniel replied that there was a plan, but Hamza wouldn't like it. Hamza raised an eyebrow. Daniel explained. They wouldn't fight in the open. They couldn't hold out against 150 horsemen. Instead, they would make sure the horsemen wouldn't want to attack. Oil. Daniel ordered a trench to be dug around the camp, not very deep, half a meter, 1.5 meters wide, in a ring with a single passage. Fill the trench with crude oil, mix it with sand, cover it with a thin layer of regular sand, an invisible trap. When the cavalry advances on the camp, torches into the trench, a wall of fire. Horses are afraid of fire, any horses, even the most trained ones. A wall of flame 3 meters high will stop any cavalry. Hamza listened. He was silent. Then he nodded slowly. He said the plan was crazy, but it might work. They dug for 5 days, everyone, men, women, children over 10. Daniel himself came out with a shovel. He held out an hour. The wound in his chest flared up. Layla pulled him back, quietly, by the hand. Without a word, she simply took him by the elbow and led him away. He didn't resist. She was right. His body was still weak. The trench was ready on the 6th day. There was enough oil. The well was yielding enough. They covered it with sand. Nothing is visible from the outside, just a strip of slightly darker sand around the camp. Torches were placed every 20 paces, dry, oiled, ready to be lit. The Banu Gurab arrived on the 9th day. In the morning, Daniel saw dust on the horizon, then silhouettes, riders, many. The system highlighted them in red, a threat. He knew it even without the system. Hamza lined up the fighters at the entrance to the trench, 15 spearmen, 10 archers on makeshift stone platforms. Daniel stood behind them, with Kareem. The women and children were inside the camp. Layla refused to leave. She stood next to her brother. She held a knife in her hands, a small one, a kitchen knife. But she held it correctly, blade down, just as her father had taught her. Gurab's horsemen stopped 300 paces away. Daniel counted about 120, fewer than he'd expected, but still 8 times as many as his fighters. At the front, on a white horse, sat a large man in chainmail, Malik ibn Gurab. The sheikh rode forward, alone. He shouted across the field, "Last chance, give up the well, or I'll take everything." Daniel stepped to the edge of the trench. He shouted back, "Come closer, let's talk." Malik laughed. He gave the order. The cavalry moved forward, at a walk, then at a trot. The ground shook. Hooves. 120 horses. Daniel waited. He watched. He measured the distance. 200 paces. 150. 150. The cavalry broke into a gallop, a roar, dust, the glint of sabers. Layla squeezed his hand. He didn't look at her. He watched the trench. 20 paces. 10. The first horses stepped onto the dark strip. Daniel shouted a single word. Fire. Torches flew into the trench, simultaneously, from both sides. The oil flared up instantly. Not like wood, not like oil, like gasoline. A wall of flame rose 3 meters high, yellow-orange, with black smoke. The heat hit his face. The horses reared up. The front ranks crashed into the fire and recoiled. The horses screamed. They reared up. They threw their riders off. The rear horses pushed against the front ones. The formation crumbled. Chaos. Panic. Not a single rider made it through the fire. Not one. Malik shouted orders. He tried to turn the formation around, but the horses wouldn't listen. An animal fear of fire is stronger than any training. 5 minutes later, the cavalry retreated. In disarray. 3 riders had fallen from their horses and lay on the sand. The rest retreated 300 paces. Daniel stood and watched the oil burn. Heat. Smoke. The smell. He knew that smell. Burning oil smells the same in any world. Banu Gurab's casualties. 9 wounded. Burns, bruises. Not a single fatality. Safar's casualties. 0. The oil burned for 2 hours. Then it went out. The trench smoldered. The earth turned black. Malik ibn Gurab stood on the horizon. He watched. Then he turned his horse around and led his men away, without a word. He would return, Daniel knew it. But not today. Today, Safar had held out. Hamza approached. He looked at the trench, at the smoke, at the blackened earth. Then he looked at Daniel, and for the first time ever, he called him sheikh. Not a boy, not a nephew, a sheikh. Layla was still holding his hand. Daniel only noticed it now. He gently pulled his fingers free. She let go, but she didn't step away. The 6th month. The camp could no longer be called a camp. Daniel started calling it a settlement. 22 tents, 3 mud brick buildings, a kerosene storage shed, Rashid's workshop, and Fatima's pottery. The population had grown to 480. Refugees kept coming. Rumors spread across the desert. A tribe where children don't die. A tribe with water and fire. 5 to 10 people arrived every week. Families, lonesomes, old people abandoned by their own, children without parents. Daniel took everyone in. Kareem asked him once, "Why? Strangers are mouths to feed." Daniel replied that strangers' mouths are hands. Hands that dig, build, cook, guard. There can never be too many people. There can be too little work. And they had so much work it would have been enough for 1,000. Kerosene production had doubled. Daniel built a second distillation cube. Rashid forged another set of tubes. Fatima molded a second cooler. Now they were distilling 10 jugs a day. Trade went through Rashid. He traveled to the highway every 10 days. The wagon returned with silver and with news. The news was mixed. Good news. Kerosene was becoming known. Merchants passed the word among themselves. Merchants from distant cities asked about the black oil that burned the brightest. Demand was growing. Bad news. Faisal from Al-Darun hadn't forgotten the rejection. He spoke of Safar in business circles. He called the tribe bandits sitting on stolen land. He tried to organize a boycott, so far without success. Kerosene was too good. People bought it despite the rumors, and there was cause for alarm. In Al-Darun, they knew about the oil. Sultan Kararam received a report. So far, he hadn't acted. But for now, that's just a word, one that could change at any moment. Daniel was mulling over his next move, a contract. He needed a steady buyer, not one-off sales along the road, but an agreement, with a guaranteed volume and a guaranteed price. To do that, he needed access to the League of Six Cities, Ashraf's largest trade union. 6 city-states on the North Sea coast, merchants, bankers, shipowners. They need kerosene for their lighthouses, for warehouses, for workshops. They'll pay more than caravan traders. But the League is far away, a month's journey, and Daniel couldn't leave. He was needed here. He decided to send Rashid, with samples, with an offer. He gave him 20 jugs of the best kerosene, pure, distilled twice, clear as water, and a letter. Daniel wrote it himself, in the trade language he knew from Yusuf's memory, in clumsy handwriting, but grammatically correct. The proposal was simple. Banu Safar would supply 100 jugs of kerosene per month. The price was 3 dinars per jug, a 1-year contract. Advance payment for the first month, 300 dinars. Rashid left with a caravan for the north. With him were 4 fighters from Hamza's militia, guards. Daniel stayed behind to wait. A month, maybe 2. A long time, too long for a man accustomed to email and phone calls. While he waited, he didn't sit idly by. The 3rd well, the 2nd oil well. He drilled it 400 paces north of the 1st. The system showed that the reservoir was closer to the surface there, 14 meters. They drilled for 9 days. Oil started flowing on the 10th, not a gush, a steady stream, a good well, stable. Now he had 2 sources, 2 wells, 2 cubic meters, 10 jugs a day, and a plan for 20. Daniel began building his first real building. Not a tent, a house made of adobe bricks. He remembered the technique from his engineering history course. Clay, straw, water, mix, pack into a mold, dry in the sun. The result is a brick. Strong, heavy, fireproof, unafraid of the wind, unafraid of the rain, doesn't tear like goat skin. He put 10 women and elderly people to work on the bricks, those who couldn't do heavy work. Anyone could knead the clay and fill the molds. In 2 weeks, they had 500 bricks. In a month, 2,000. Daniel built the first house, small, 2 rooms, with a window, with a door, with a roof covered in bitumen. He built it for Layla. He didn't announce it. He didn't hold a ceremony. He just brought her to the finished house one morning and said, "This is yours, with a window, so you can read by the light." Layla stood and looked, for a long time. Then she went inside. She ran her hand along the wall, along the window sill. She walked over to the window. She looked outside. Sunlight fell on her face. She turned to Daniel. Her eyes were shining. She said that Yusuf would never have done that. He would never have built her a house. He would never have thought of a reading window. She said she didn't know who he was, but she was grateful to him, whoever he was. Daniel froze. His heart stopped for a second. She knew. She didn't know the truth, but she knew he was different. She knew that a stranger lived inside her brother's body, and she accepted it, without asking. without demanding explanations. She just accepted it. He wanted to tell her. He wanted to tell her everything, about Houston, about the pickup truck, about the orange flash, about his mother and sister in another world. But he couldn't. Not because he was afraid, because he didn't know what words to use, what language to speak. He said only one thing, that she wasn't a bargaining chip, that she was his sister, and that she would learn until she herself said enough. Layla nodded, wiped her eyes, and hugged him for the first time. Quickly, briefly, as if she were afraid he would push her away. He didn't push her away. Rashid returned 7 weeks later. 3 others came with him, not fighters, merchants, representatives of the League of 6 Cities. They wanted to see the production with their own eyes. Daniel showed them the wells, the vats, the jugs. He lit a lamp, let them taste the fuel oil, showed them the bitumen on the roofs. The merchants watched. They touched. They sniffed. They counted. The eldest among them, named Adil, spent 3 days in Safara. On the 4th day, he sat down at the table with Daniel. He said the League was interested, but the terms would be different. Not 100 jugs a month, 300. Not 3 dinars per jug, 2.5. And the contract wasn't for a year, for 3 years. Daniel did the math in his head. 300 jugs a month at 2.5 dinars. 750 dinars a month. 9,000 a year. 27,000 over 3 years. That was more than he had ever earned before. 100 times more. But 300 jugs a month meant 10 a day. That was all he made. So all the kerosene would go to the League, nothing for the open market. A monopoly. Again, Daniel negotiated, calmly, methodically, just like in negotiations with contractors in Texas. He agreed to 250 jugs, 2 dinars, 75 each, with the right to sell the surplus freely. A 2-year contract with an option to renew. 2 months advance payment. 1,375 dinars. Adil bargained back, toughly but respectfully. They settled on 250 jugs at 2 dinars 60 each. A 2-year contract, prepayment for the first month. 650 dinars. Adil took out his purse. He counted out the coins. 650 silver dinars were laid on the table in front of Daniel. He looked at them. 650 coins. A month ago, the tribe had 4. Adil held out his hand. Daniel shook it. The contract. Banu Safar's first real contract. The system updated the data. GDP shot up. The rank went up. F became D. 2 ranks in a single day. The first year was coming to an end. 650 dinars had changed everything. Daniel spent methodically, just as he had drawn up the budget for the drilling project. Every coin had a purpose. 100 dinars for iron and copper. Rashid forged non-stop. Tools, nails, hinges, spears, hoops for barrels. Barrels. Daniel needed barrels. Jugs are fine for small volumes. For 250 jugs a month, he needed larger containers. He found a solution. 20-liter wooden barrels, iron hoops, acacia staves. The bottom made of acacia. The seams were sealed with bitumen. They didn't leak. Daniel taught 4 men how to make barrels. Within a month, they had the production up and running. 10 barrels a week. 1 barrel replaced 4 jugs. 50 dinars for food, grain, millet, dates, honey, salt. The tribe ate their fill, every day, twice a day, morning and evening. The children received milk. The goat herd grew to 40 head. They bought 20 sheep, meat once a week. A luxury these people hadn't known in years. 100 dinars for weapons. Hamza made a list. 20 sabers, 30 spearheads, 500 arrows, 10 chainmail suits. Daniel looked over the list and added one item, a spyglass. Hamza asked what it was. Daniel explained. 2 convex glass lenses in a tube. They let you see far away, very far away, to see the enemy an hour before they get within striking distance. Hamza whistled. He asked where to get such a thing. Daniel replied, in the League of 6 Cities. There are glass blowers there. He added the spyglass to the order for Adil. Adil promised to bring it with the next shipment. Daniel set aside 200 dinars, a reserve, just in case of the unexpected. He knew that the unexpected was bound to happen. The remaining 200 dinars went toward construction. A wall. Daniel began building a wall around the settlement, a mud brick wall, 2.5 meters high, 1 meter thick, with 4 towers at the corners. The project was enormous. Thousands of bricks, hundreds of man-days. But there were people, and they wanted to work. The refugees who had come to Safar hungry and ragged were now fed and clothed. They were grateful, and they expressed their gratitude in the only way they knew how, through labor. The wall grew slowly, section by section, week by week. By the end of the first year, it was 3/4 complete. The north wall, the east, the south, the west remained open. There weren't enough bricks. Daniel wasn't in a hurry. The wall was important, but not critical. The oil trench still served as the first line of defense. Between construction and production, Daniel found time for one more project. A school. It all started because of Karim. One day, the boy brought him a stone, flat, yellow, with a symbol carved into it. He found it by the old caravan route. He asked what it meant. Daniel looked at it. The symbol was simple, an arrow and a number, a caravan marker, an indicator of the distance to the nearest well. He explained it to Karim, but as he explained, he realized the boy couldn't read. No symbols, no letters, no numbers. 10 years old, smart, brave, and illiterate. Like all the children in the tribe, like almost all the adults, Layla could read. Her father had taught her. She was the exception. Daniel decided. School, evening classes, after work, Layla as the teacher. Students, all children aged 6 to 14, and any adults who wanted to join. Layla agreed instantly. Her eyes lit up in a way Daniel had never seen before. She asked for only one thing: books. Daniel promised. He included them in his next order for Adil. 10 books, any books, in the trade language. Class began a week later, in the evening, after sunset, by the light of 4 kerosene lamps. 23 students, Karim among them. Layla stood before them with a stick and drew letters on a clay tablet. Alif, Ba, Ta. Daniel sat in the corner and listened, not because he had to, because he wanted to. Layla's voice in the silence of the desert night, children's voices repeating after her, the light of kerosene on the clay walls. It was right. For the first time in 7 months in this world, Daniel felt he was doing something not for survival, for life. 2 days after the school opened, news arrived. Rashid brought it from the highway. The Sultanate of Al-Darun had sent an envoy to Safar, officially, with the Sultan's seal. Daniel received him in the new council building, mud brick, with a long table, with lamps on the walls. The envoy was not young, calm, polite. He conveyed the words of Sultan Karam. The Sultan has heard of the achievements of the young sheikh Yusuf ibn Safar. The Sultan is impressed. The Sultan offers a generous gift. Banu Safar may join the Sultanate of Al-Darun as a vassal tribe. Protection from the great Sultanate, access to trade routes, exemption from duties for 3 years. In exchange, a tithe. 10% of everything Safar produces, and the right of first refusal on kerosene for the Sultanate's needs, at a fair price, to be set by the Sultan. Daniel listened. He poured the envoy some tea. He said he was grateful to the Sultan for his consideration, that he respected Karam's wisdom, and that Banu Safar preferred to remain independent. The envoy nodded, without surprise, as if he had expected this answer. He asked if he could convey anything else. Daniel thought. Then he said, "Tell the Sultan that Safar is ready to trade, as equals, as a partner, not as a vassal. Kerosene, fuel oil, bitumen, anything, at market prices. We are not enemies of Al-Darun, we are neighbors," the envoy smiled, subtly. He said he would pass it on, and left. Hamza stood by the door. He heard everything. When the envoy disappeared over the horizon, he approached Daniel. He said quietly, "Boy, you just refused Karam al-Darun, the most powerful man in southern Hashraf. He's not a merchant from the caravan route. He's a sultan with an army of 10,000 swords." Daniel nodded. He knew. Hamza continued, "Karam isn't the type to ask twice. Next time, he won't send a messenger. He'll send an army." Daniel nodded again and said, "So we need to become valuable enough before he decides it's easier to destroy us than to trade with us." Hamza was silent. Then he smiled. That very smile, an approving one. He said the plan was bold, insane. But the boy had one quality that Hamza respected. He wasn't afraid. Daniel didn't say he was afraid. Very afraid. Every day, every night. That he'd wake up and see 1,000 horsemen on the horizon. That everything he'd built would burn to the ground in a single attack. That 312, no, already 480 people who'd trusted him would die because of his pride. But fear isn't a reason to give up. Fear is a reason to work faster. The system, rank D. GDP is growing steadily. The population is growing. The first year was coming to an end. And Daniel knew the second would be harder, much harder. The second year began with a miracle. Not the kind of miracle Daniel performed. A different one. At dawn, a woman approached the village gates. Alone. Without a caravan, without belongings. In a tattered dress and worn-out sandals. A redhead, with freckles on her sunburned nose. She was staggering from exhaustion. The guard called out to her. She looked up. She looked at him and said 3 words in English. "Excuse me, please." The guard didn't understand. He called Karim. Karim didn't understand either. He ran to get the sheikh. Daniel came out to the gate. He saw the woman. Red hair, freckles, white skin sunburned red, blue eyes, inflamed, chapped lips. She was looking at him, and he saw in her eyes what he saw in the mirror every morning. A stranger, an outsider, a man not of this world. He stepped closer, leaned toward her, and whispered in English, "You speak English." Her whole body shuddered, as if she'd been struck. Then her face contorted, and she began to cry, not quietly like Layla, loudly, out loud, sobbing, like a person who had been holding on with their last ounce of strength and had finally broken. Daniel took her to his house, gave her water, food, waited until she calmed, then they talked. In English. For the first time in 8 months, Daniel spoke his native language. The words poured out of him like water from a burst pipe. Her name was Sarah. Sarah Green, 26 years old, a cartographer from Boston. She had been working on a geological expedition in Turkey. She fell from a horse on a mountain pass. The last thing she remembered was a rocky slope hurtling toward her face. She woke up in the body of the daughter of a bankrupt merchant, a young woman who had died of a fever. The body was being transported to Al-Darun to be sold. The slave traders didn't realize the deceased had come back to life. They only discovered it an hour later when she began to moan. They decided they'd gotten lucky. Live merchandise is worth more than dead. Sarah spent 4 months in slavery, in Al-Darun. She didn't know where she was. She didn't understand the language. She didn't understand what had happened. She thought she had gone mad, or that she was in a coma, or that she had died and this was hell. Then she began to learn the language. She began to listen. She began to understand. And she realized that this wasn't hell. It was another world, the real one, with real people. And she was stuck here. She had run away from her master 2 months ago. She headed south, didn't know where, just walked. Heard from nomads about a tribe in the south where a sheikh performed miracles. Went there, not because she believed in miracles, because there was nowhere else to go. Daniel listened. He was silent, his hands clenched. Because in every word she spoke, he heard his own story. A different body, a different pain, but the same horror of waking up, the same loss. She fell silent, looked at him, asked, "You too?" He nodded. Houston, petroleum engineer, a pickup truck on I-10. She closed her eyes. She was silent for a long time. Then she said one word. God. They sat in silence. Two Americans in foreign bodies in the middle of a desert in a world that shouldn't exist. Then Sarah asked, "Does he have the system? Golden letters, ranks?" He said yes. She said she had it too, but a different one. Not the ruler's system, the explorer's system. She sees a map. Any territory she's traveled through is recorded in her memory. Every trail, every rock, every turn. A photographic memory for the terrain, plus a compass that never fails, plus a sense for distances and heights. She's a cartographer, and her system has made her the perfect cartographer. Daniel looked at her. A cartographer, in a world without maps, where caravans travel by the stars, where armies wander in the desert because they don't know the way. A map is power. A map is trade. A map is military advantage. He told her, "Stay. Work with me. I'm building a city. I need a map of the southern deserts, a map of trade routes, a map of water sources, a map of oil fields, everything." She asked what she would get in return. He replied, "A home, food, safety, and a workshop." He would build her a cartographic workshop, with tables, with paper, with ink, with rulers, and with students. 10 girls whom she would teach her craft, so as not to depend on a single person, so that the knowledge would remain. Sarah was silent for a long time. Then she asked quietly, "You have a family?" "There." He nodded. "A mother, a sister." She closed her eyes. She said she had a daughter, 8 years old, Ella. She had left an 8-year-old daughter behind. Her voice broke. Daniel didn't try to comfort her. He didn't say that everything would be all right, because it wouldn't. They both knew it. They wouldn't be coming back. Ever. He said only one thing, that Ella was alive, and that she would live well, because she had a mother who taught her to be strong. And that Sarah would do here what she had to do, not as a betrayal, as a bridge. The only bridge she had. Sarah opened her eyes, looked at him, nodded. They shook hands, not as a man and a woman, as 2 engineers, 2 professionals, 2 people who had lost everything and decided to build anew. Over the next month, Sarah walked 200 kilometers around Safar. 2 fighters from Hamza's militia accompanied her, guards. She returned every 3 days, dirty, tired, sunburned, and happy, because she had a job again, a real job. She was drawing a map on tanned goat skin with ink made of soot and oil. The lines were straight, the proportions were precise, the scale was accurate. The first topographic map of the southern deserts in the history of Ashraf. When she unfolded the finished sheet in front of Daniel, he stared at it in silence for a minute. Then he said quietly, "Sarah, this is a masterpiece." She snorted. She said that in Boston she would have gotten a C- for a map like this. The lines are crooked, the ink is smudged, the scale is off by 2%. But for goat skin and a stick instead of a pen, it'll do. Daniel smiled. For the first time in a long time. A real smile. Not for the tribe, not for the elders, for himself. Because he was no longer alone. On Sarah's map, he saw what he was looking for. Trade routes, water sources, the locations of neighboring tribes, and something else. 60 kilometers to the north, the system highlighted another dark spot. Another oil-bearing layer, bigger than the first. Much bigger. Daniel looked at Sarah. She looked at him. He said, "A second field." She nodded. She marked the spot on the map and wrote next to it in small handwriting, "There will be a city here, the second year." Safar was changing with each passing day. The wall was complete, mud brick, 2.5 meters high, 4 towers, 2 gates, north and south. Inside the walls stood 14 houses already, mud brick, with bitumen roofs, with windows, with doors on iron hinges. The population had surpassed 700. New people arrived every week, no longer just one at a time, in families, sometimes whole clans, small tribes that couldn't survive on their own. They came to the gates of Safar and asked to be taken in. Daniel took them in. Everyone. The first school was open every evening. 30 students. Layla taught the alphabet and arithmetic. Daniel brought her books from the league, 12 of them. Trade manuals, a collection of laws, poetry, a medical treatise. Layla read them at night by the light of a kerosene lamp. In the morning, she would retell to the students. Kareem learned to read in 3 weeks. Within a month, he began to write. His handwriting was terrible, but he wrote. He kept records. He counted the barrels. He noted the deliveries. Daniel made him an accountant. Safar's chief accountant. The boy was 11 years old. Hamza trained the guard, 30 fighters, with sabers, with bows, with spears, in chainmail. Not an army, but no longer a militia of old men with sticks. Hamza drove them hard, drill, shooting, close combat. The fighters respected him, feared him, and obeyed him. Daniel gave Hamza a title, Commander of the Guard. Hamza accepted it without thanks, but with dignity. He knew his worth, and he knew that Daniel knew it too. A strange balance had settled between them, not friendship, not enmity. A business partnership between two people who needed each other, and both understood it. Sarah worked, every day. She had covered 500 kilometers in 3 months. The map of the southern deserts had grown to 3 goatskins. All the wells were marked on it, all the caravan routes, all the settlements, distances, elevations, soil types. Daniel used her map as a strategic tool. He saw what any oilman would see: logistics, where to set up drilling sites, where to build roads, where to build staging depots, where to route the caravans. The map provided answers to all these questions, and the map showed him something else. The League of 6 cities received kerosene via a long route, through the desert, through the lands of 3 tribes, a month's journey. Losses, theft, breakdowns. Half the profit went to logistics, but on Sarah's map, Daniel saw another route. Through the northern gorge, half the distance, safer, through lands that belonged to no one. He told Sarah to check the route. She was gone for a week. She returned and confirmed it. There was a passage, wide, smooth. The caravan would make it through. Daniel smiled. The smile of an oil man who'd found a shortcut. He sent Rashid to Adil with a proposal, a new supply route, faster, cheaper, safer, and an increase in volume. 400 barrels a month instead of 250. The price remains the same. Adil agreed without haggling. 400 barrels, 1,000 dinars a month, 12,000 a year.
Daniel looked at the numbers and, for the first time in a long while, thought in terms of his past life. We've reached industrial scale. In the 6th month of the 2nd year, the second blow came. The Banu Gurab returned. Not Malik. Malik was dead. Fever. His son, Tariq. Younger than his father, more vicious and smarter. Tariq didn't lead the cavalry into the wall of fire. He bypassed Safar from the west, cut off the caravan route. 3 caravans with kerosene didn't make it to the League.
A trade blockade. Daniel lost 3,000 dinars in a month. Hamza suggested an attack, to go out from within the walls, to strike at Tariq's camp, to crush and drive them away. Daniel refused. 30 fighters against 200? Suicide. Instead, he did what any good oil man facing a blockade would do. He found a detour. Sarah's new route. Through the northern gorge. Tariq didn't know about it. No one knew. There was only one copy of Sarah's map, and it was kept at Daniel's house. The first caravan set out on the new route at night. 10 camels, 40 barrels. Rashid at the head. 2 weeks later, Rashid returned, with money. Tariq continued to block the old route, and he didn't understand why the kerosene still reached the League. A month later, he gave up. He took his men away. The blockade had failed. Daniel won not through combat, but through logistics, through a map, through knowledge the enemy lacked. When Sarah heard this, she smiled and said that in Boston, her thesis was titled, "The Significance of Topography in Military Strategy." The professor had given her a B- for it. Daniel said the professor was an idiot. She laughed. For the first time in all the time he'd known her. In the 9th month of the 2nd year, an event occurred that shifted the balance of power. A diplomatic caravan arrived from the League of 6 cities, 10 camels, 20 guards, silk tents, and an ambassador, a young woman, the daughter of a Korean diplomat in the League's service. Yuna Song, 22 years old, cold eyes, impeccable posture, 4 languages. She had come to keep an eye on the barbarians, that's what she said herself, not to Daniel, to her secretary, whom Karim overheard, who relayed it to Daniel. Daniel received her in the council chamber, the new chamber, stone with a large table, with a map on the wall, with kerosene lamps. Yuna entered. She looked around. Not a single muscle in her face twitched, but Daniel saw how her eyes lingered on the map, on the lamps, on the kerosene barrels by the wall. She was assessing, evaluating, weighing her options, a professional observer. She conveyed an official greeting from the League Council. The League values its partnership with Safar. The League is interested in expanding trade. The League proposes that Ms. Yuna Song remain in Safar as a permanent trade representative. To coordinate shipments, to resolve disputes, to deepen mutual understanding. Daniel understood. A spy. The League wants eyes and ears inside Safar to know how much he produces, how much he earns, how his defenses are organized, who his people are, what his weaknesses are. He could have refused, but he didn't. A spy you can see is better than one you can't, and Yuna could be useful. A link to the League, a diplomatic channel, information about what's happening in the north. He agreed. He gave her a house, the best one after his own, with 2 rooms, with a window facing east, with a kerosene lamp, and with a maid. Yuna accepted it without thanks, as a matter of course. She unpacked her things, she arranged her books. She hung a small instrument on the wall, similar to a guqin, a stringed instrument with a long neck. Daniel noticed the instrument the next day as he walked past her house. Yuna was sitting by the window, plucking the strings, quietly, slowly. The melody was simple, sad. He stopped. He listened. She noticed him. She stopped playing. She looked at him coldly. He asked what the melody was. She replied that it was a lullaby, one her mother used to sing to her when she was 5. He asked what her favorite color was. Yuna blinked. The question was so out of place in the context of a diplomatic visit that she was taken aback. For the first time in his memory, she asked why he needed to know. He replied that he was just curious. Not a diplomatic answer, a genuine one. Yuna was silent for a long time. Then she said she didn't know. No one had ever asked. Daniel nodded. He said, "Think about it. Tell me when you've decided." And he left. Yuna watched him go, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't know what to write in her report. End of the second year. Population 1,200. The wall is complete. The school is open. 2 trades. 400 barrels of kerosene a month. A contract with the League. A diplomatic representative. 30 guards. A pharmacy. A small one. Layla runs it. Herbs, ointments, bandages, boiled water. Basic medicine that saves lives. The system updated the rank. C. Then C+. Daniel stood on the tower of the northern wall. He looked at the settlement. No, a town. Small, dirty, crooked, but a town. With houses, with streets, with a school and a pharmacy, with workshops and warehouses, with people who don't die of thirst and diarrhea. 2 years ago, there were tattered tents and dead goats here. 4 dinars, rank F-. He looked at the stars, the same stars, bright, close, angry. And he quietly said one sentence in English, addressing his mother, who couldn't hear, addressing his sister, who didn't know, addressing himself, who still didn't believe. We've only just begun. The third year began with rain. The first rain in 4 years. It fell for 20 minutes, light, weak, barely noticeable. But people ran out of their houses and stood with their faces turned upward. Children caught the drops in their mouths. The women laughed. Old Nazira sat on the threshold of her house and whispered a prayer. Daniel stood on the roof of the council hall and looked down at his city. Wet walls, wet roofs, wet faces. 1,200 people in the rain. Half of them were alive only because 2 years ago he had sat down in the sand and lit the oil film on his finger. He didn't think about it often. He didn't allow himself to. But now, in the rain, he allowed it. And quickly stopped. Because rain is good, but the third year is bad. He knew what was coming. He could feel it in the way the figures moved on the map. The Sultanate of Al-Darun. Sultan Karam hadn't forgotten the refusal. He'd waited 2 years, watched, counted. And now Daniel had become rich enough to be dangerous, but not yet strong enough to be invulnerable. The perfect moment to strike. The first sign came a month later. Yuna brought it, quietly, in the evening. She knocked on the door of his house. She entered, closed the door behind her, placed a folded sheet of paper on the table. Daniel unfolded it. A letter. In the League's diplomatic language, Yuna translated. The League Council had received a proposal from the Sultanate of Al-Darun. Sultan Karam was offering the League a joint trade operation. The gist, the League would terminate its contract with Safar. Al-Darun would take control of Safar and supplies kerosene directly to the League, at the same price. The League loses nothing. Al-Darun gets oil. Safar gets a master. Daniel read it twice. He asked Yuna why she was showing him this. She's a League spy. This is secret correspondence. Why? Yuna was silent, for a long time. Then she said she'd spent 3 months in Safar. That she'd seen children learning to read at Layla's school. How Maya treats the elderly with herbs and boiled water. How Rashid forges tools from dawn till dusk. How Karim keeps track of every barrel more meticulously than the League's bankers. She said she wrote reports to the League, detailed, accurate, just as she had been taught. And in every report, she referred to him as Subject D, the object of observation, nameless, faceless.
But after the question about his favorite color, after she had watched him for 3 months as he built a city from nothing, not for himself, for the people, she wrote her final report, in which, for the first time, she called him by name, Yusuf. And at the end, she added a single line. I recommend not terminating the contract. Safar is more valuable as a partner than as a target. Daniel looked at her. Yuna didn't look away. The ice in her eyes cracked. It didn't melt, but it cracked. He asked, The League will listen. Yuna answered honestly. She doesn't know. The League's vote, that's 6 votes. 3 for money, 2 for stability, 1 for principles. Karam offers money and stability. Yuna can influence only 1 vote. Her father's.
But 1 vote out of 6 is not enough. Daniel nodded. He thanked her. Yuna stood up. She walked to the door. She stopped. Without turning around, she said, Green, my favorite color. Green, like grass, which I've only seen in pictures. She left. Daniel sat in silence. Then he took out a map. He spread it out on the table. He thought, if Karam goes to war, he'll have to march 400 kilometers through the desert, an army of 10,000. That's thousands of camels, tons of water, a month's journey, a logistical nightmare. But Karam knew that. He won't go head-on. He's smarter than that. Daniel called for Sarah. He laid the map out in front of her. He asked, if you were leading an army from Al-Darun to Safar, which route would you choose? Sarah studied the map for 10 minutes. Then she pointed her finger. Through the Karib Gorge, in the southeast, the shortest route, 10 days. But the gorge is narrow. The army will have to march in column, vulnerable to ambushes. Karam isn't a fool. He'll send out scouts, but he'll lead the main army through here. She pointed to another spot, across the Ashur plain, 5 days longer, but flat, open, perfect for cavalry. And with 2 wells along the way, Karam will be able to water the army. Daniel looked at the map, the Ashur plain, 15 days from Al-Darun. If Karam starts gathering his army now, in 2 months, it will be at the gates of Safar. 2 months. Daniel called a council, a full one. Hamza, Karim, Layla, Sarah, Nazira, Hamza's daughter, who had appeared at the outpost 6 months ago and quickly became the squad's best fighter. Tall, slender, a scar across her eyebrow, a saber at her belt. The only female warrior in Safar. Hamza had allowed her to bear arms because he had no sons. She was his heir. And now she sat at the council table next to her father. Daniel explained the situation. Karam is coming. Maybe in 2 months, maybe in 3. But he's coming. He won't send an envoy. He'll send an army. Hamza asked how many. Daniel replied, according to Yuna's reports, 3,000 to 5,000. Not the entire army, an expeditionary force, cavalry, archers, siege engines. Silence. 3,000 to 5,000. Safar has 30 fighters, a clay wall, and an oil trench. Against 3,000 professional soldiers, that's nothing. Hamza said bluntly. We won't hold out. Head on. We won't hold out. Daniel nodded. Not head on. That's why we won't fight head on. He laid out the plan, not a military one, an economic one. Safar won't fight Al-Darun with an army. Safar will fight with kerosene. Over 2 years, Al-Darun has grown accustomed to kerosene. The Sultan's palaces are lit by kerosene lamps. His workshops are lubricated with fuel oil. His caravans depend on lubrication. His cities burn at night not with oil, but kerosene. They didn't buy it directly. They bought it through middlemen, through the black market, through the League. But kerosene from Safar has seeped into Al-Darun's economy like water into sand. Without it, the cities will plunge into darkness. The caravans will come to a standstill. Workshops will stop. Daniel will declare an embargo.
a total one. Not a single barrel of kerosene will go to Al-Darun or its allies. Not a single drop of fuel oil. Not a single handful of bitumen. Until Karam withdraws his army. Hamza listened. He was silent. Then he spoke. "And if he doesn't withdraw? If he comes anyway?" Daniel replied. "Then plan B." He looked at the map, at the spot Sarah had marked, the Ashur Plain, with 2 wells. Without those wells, the army won't make it.
It can't. 3,000 to 5,000 men, thousands of horses and camels, 15 days in the desert. Without water halfway there, it's death. Daniel said quietly, "We'll poison the wells." Silence. Absolute. Layla turned pale. Sarah frowned. Even Hamza raised an eyebrow. Daniel corrected himself. "We won't poison them. We'll make them unusable. Oil, crude oil into the well. The water will become undrinkable. Neither man nor horse will be able to drink it. The army will reach the first well. They'll find the water is black. They'll turn back, or die of thirst. Karam isn't suicidal. He'll turn back." Hamza nodded slowly. He said, "A dirty plan, but a smart one." Nazira, his daughter, smiled, subtly, predatorily. She said, "I'll lead the detachment to the wells." Daniel looked at her. He nodded. 10 fighters, 20 camels with barrels of oil. A 5-day journey. Nazira left the next morning. Daniel watched as the 10 riders faded into the haze. Then he turned to Karim. He said, "Send a messenger to Adil in the League. Tell him Safar is declaring a trade embargo on Al-Darun and all its vassals. Anyone who resells our kerosene to the Sultanate will lose their contract. Forever." Karim ran off. Daniel remained on the wall. Alone. The war had begun. Not the war he had been preparing for. Not fire and swords. Economic. Quiet. Invisible. But deadly. The embargo hit 3 weeks later. The merchants of Al-Darun were the first to cry out. The kerosene warehouses were emptied. The middlemen who had been secretly buying barrels from the League discovered that shipments had stopped. Oil prices tripled. Workshops ground to a halt. Lighthouses along the trade routes went dark one by one. Caravanners refused to travel on the dark roads. Trade slowed to a crawl. Daniel knew what was happening because Yuna told him. Every evening she came to him with news, no longer in secret, out in the open. She no longer wrote reports to the League. She had written one last one, a resignation as an observer. Officially, she remained a trade representative. Unofficially, she became Daniel's foreign policy advisor. The League Council voted 4-2. The contract with Safar was preserved. Karam's proposal was rejected. Yuna's father's vote proved decisive. Daniel asked what she had told her father. Yuna replied briefly. The truth. 5 weeks after the embargo began, news arrived from Nazira. A messenger on a camel, exhausted, dusty. He relayed Nazira's words. "Both wells on the Ashur Plain are flooded with oil. The water is undrinkable. The job was done without losses. The detachment is returning." 2 days after that, another message arrived. Al-Darun had set out, 3,000 horsemen. Karam did not lead them himself. He sent a general, Ibrahim al-Nur, experienced, ruthless, nicknamed the Lion of the Desert for his campaign against the northern nomads 10 years ago. Ibrahim led the army across the Ashur Plain, just as Sarah had predicted. Daniel waited. He counted the days. On the 7th day of the journey, the army reached the first well. Daniel learned of this from the scouts Hamza had scattered across the desert. 3 pairs of eyes, on swift camels. They watched from afar and sent messengers. The army stopped at the well. They found black water. They camped for the day. The general sent scouts to the second well. The scouts returned. The second well was dry too. The army stood idle for 3 days. Their water supplies would last another 4. 8 days' journey to Safar. Without water. Impossible. General Ibrahim was smart. Cruel, but not insane. He turned the army around. 3,000 horsemen turned back. 6 days later they returned to Al-Darun, without a fight, without casualties, without glory. Daniel stood on the wall and looked to the southeast. There was only desert there, empty, dead, without an army. He had won. No, he hadn't won. He'd bought time. Karam wouldn't stop. He'd find another way, another plan, another route with different wells. Or he'd bring water with him. Or he'd go through the Karib Gorge, slower, more dangerous. But he'd go. Daniel knew this wasn't the end. It was a pause. The pause lasted 4 months. 4 months during which Daniel worked like a man possessed. The third drilling site, 60 kilometers to the north, where Sarah had found the second oil layer. He sent a crew of 20 men, with Rashid, with tools, with a 2-month supply of food. They drilled the well in 3 weeks. This layer was richer than the first. The oil flowed thick, heavy, high resin content, perfect for bitumen. Daniel established a second settlement nearby, a small one, 20 houses, a wall, a warehouse, 2 distillation vats. An intermediate base between Safar and the northern route to Ligu. He named it Safar Shimal, Northern Safar. Daniel built a road between the 2 settlements, the first real road in southern Kashraf. He leveled the sand, tamped it down, covered it with bitumen, asphalt, rough, uneven, but solid. Caravans traveled along it twice as fast as they did on the sand. The camels didn't get stuck. The carts didn't break. The road changed everything. 20 kilometers of asphalt. It cost him 200 barrels of bitumen and a month's work by 100 men. But it paid for itself in 2 weeks thanks to faster deliveries. Saba al-Zarif arrived in Safar via this very road in the 3rd month of the lull. She arrived with a caravan of 5 camels, loaded with copper. A young woman in a man's sash, with a long pipe between her teeth, with the eyes of a merchant. Shrewd, quick, calculating. She requested an audience with the sheikh. Daniel granted it. Saba sat down opposite him. She placed a purse on the table, opened it, poured out gold coins. Not silver, gold. 100 gold dinars, a small fortune. She said, "This is my capital, all that remains of the Al-Zarif." Her uncle had ruined the firm, stolen her inheritance, forged documents. She was left with nothing. Except for these coins, which she had hidden before her uncle got to the safe. She proposed a deal. She would invest 100 gold dinars. Daniel would give her the exclusive right to export kerosene to Al-Darun. When the embargo, and it will end, because the war cannot last forever. When Kahram signs the peace treaty, and he will sign it, because without kerosene his cities will die. When that happens, Saba will become the sole supply channel. She will buy from Safar for 2 dinars, sell in Al-Darun for 5. A 300% markup, of which 100% goes back to Safar as tax. Bottom line, Saba makes double, Safar makes quadruple. Everyone wins, except Uncle Saba, who trades in oil. Daniel listened and smiled slowly, because sitting across from him was a woman who thought like him. Long-term money, strategy, position. He asked one thing. Why had she come to Safar and not to the others? Saba took a long drag on her pipe. She exhaled smoke. She answered, because the others trade in goods, and he trades in the future. She wants to be part of the future. Daniel held out his hand. Saba shook it, firmly, like a man. A contract. He made her Safar's Minister of Trade, a title he had just made up. Saba laughed. She said that in Al-Darun, a female minister was like a camel with wings. Daniel replied that in Safar, camels didn't fly yet, but kerosene was already burning, so anything was possible. The 4th month of the pause. Karam sent a new envoy, not a military one, a diplomatic one, an old one, a wise one. The envoy brought a proposal. Peace, on certain terms. Safar lifts the embargo. Al-Darun recognizes Safar's independence. A trade agreement, kerosene at a fixed price, 3 dinars per barrel. No vassalage, no tithe, no oversight. Equal parties. Daniel read the terms. 3 dinars, below the market price, which had jumped to 6 after the embargo, but above cost. And most importantly, recognition of independence. Legal, formal, with the Sultan's seal. That was worth more than the difference in price. He agreed. With one amendment, not 3 dinars, 3.5. And Saba al-Zarif would conduct all negotiations on behalf of Safar. The envoy grimaced. A woman, a merchant's wife, representing an entire state, unheard of. Daniel repeated. Saba al-Zarif. Her word is my word. The envoy left with the amendment. He returned a month later with the Sultan's seal. 3.5 dinars. Saba al-Zarif is recognized as Safar's official trade representative at the court of Al-Darun. The war is over. Without a fight, without bloodshed. No swords or arrows. A kerosene war. The first in the history of Hashraf. The system updated the rank. B. The end of the 3rd year. The battle Daniel had been waiting for and fearing. Not from Karam. Karam had signed a peace treaty. The threat came from where they least expected it. Banu Ghurab. Tariq ibn Ghurab. The very same young sheikh who tried to block the trade routes a year ago. Tariq hadn't forgotten the humiliation. And while Daniel was fighting Al-Darun, Tariq was gathering strength, hiring men, buying up weapons, and finding allies. Mercenaries from the eastern deserts, traders from 3 neighboring tribes who had Safar, and money, lots of money, which came through secret channels from Al-Darun. Karam signed a peace treaty, but peace did not mean friendship. Peace meant that Karam would not send his own army. But nothing prevented him from paying someone else's. Tariq gathered 1,200 fighters, cavalry, infantry, archers, 2 siege rams. He was marching on Safar. Hamza's scouts spotted him 2 weeks. Daniel stood over the map. Sarah was beside him. Hamza was beside him. Nazira, Hamza's daughter, Karim, Yuna, Saba. Everyone. 1,200 against Safar's 50 fighters. A mud brick wall, 2.5 meters high. The battering rams will breach it in an hour. The oil trench will work once, maybe twice. But 1,200 is not 120. They'll bypass the trench. They'll find a way in, and they'll enter. Hamza said quietly, "We need more people. We need weapons. We need time." Daniel replied, "We have time. 2 weeks. We have people. Safar's population is 2,000. Of those, 600 men capable of wielding a spear. We have no weapons, but we have oil." He laid out the plan. Not a wall, not a trench. Deeper, more complex, more insane. Trenches. Many trenches. Not just one around the city. 3 rings. The outer one 200 meters from the walls. The middle one 100. The inner one right up against the walls. Each filled with oil. Each camouflaged with sand. Narrow passages between the rings, known only to their own. The enemy enters the first ring. Fire. Retreats. He goes around. finds a passage, enters the second ring. Fire, retreats, panic, chaos. And while the cavalry dashes between the walls of fire, the archers on the walls are at work, calmly, methodically, just like in Hamza's drills. Hamza listened. He was silent for a long time. Then he said one word, "I approve." Nazira, his daughter, bared her teeth. She craved battle. Her father had trained her for this. 2 weeks, all of Safar dug. Men, women, children over 12, Daniel himself, Layla, Sarah. Yuna, who had never held a shovel in her life, rubbed her palms raw on the first day. On the second day, she wrapped them in rags and carried on. 3 rings of trenches, each half a meter deep, 1.5 meters wide, filled with oil, covered with sand. Torches placed every 15 paces. The passages marked with stones known only to Hamza's fighters. Daniel added one more thing, a signaling system. Flags, red, green, yellow. An observer with flags on every tower. Daniel on the roof of the council hall with a spyglass. He sees the field. He gives commands with the flags. The towers relay them to the fighters. Coordination, communication, battle management. Something no army of Hashraf had ever had. When Hamza saw the flag system in action during the drills, he shook his head. He said that in 40 years of military service, he had never seen anything like it. That the sheikh fights not with a sword, but with his head, and that this is more terrifying than any sword. Tariq arrived on the 15th day. In the morning, dust on the horizon, then silhouettes. 1,200 fighters, cavalry in front, infantry behind, 2 battering rams on wheels, the banners of Banu Ghurab, black with a red falcon. Daniel stood on the roof, a spyglass to his eye. He saw Tariq's face, young, angry, confident. Tariq knew that Safar had 50 fighters. He had brought 1,200, 24 to 1. Even with the walls and trenches, that was an overwhelming advantage. He didn't know about the 3 rings, didn't know about the flags, didn't know that Daniel could see every one of his horsemen through the lens. Tariq gave the order. The cavalry charged, 400 horsemen, at a gallop, hooves, roar, dust. They charged the walls of Safar, like a wave against a cliff. Daniel waited, counted. 200 meters, 150, 100. The first horses entered the outer ring. Daniel raised the red flag. The towers followed suit. And the outer trench burst into flames, a wall of fire, 3 meters high, yellow-orange with black smoke. The horses reared. The riders screamed. The first row crashed into the fire and recoiled. The ones behind pressed forward. Chaos. But Tariq was smarter than his father. He didn't charge. He led the cavalry back, regrouped, sent scouts along the ring, found a passage, narrow, 2 abreast. He drove the cavalry through the gap. 200 horsemen entered the space between the outer and middle rings. Daniel raised a yellow flag. Archers on the walls began to shoot. The arrows flew true. Hamza had trained the archers for 3 months. They didn't miss. Riders fell. Horses fell. Tariq shouted commands. He drove the men toward the wall. The cavalry broke through the middle ring. Daniel set it ablaze. A second wall of fire. Closer. Hotter. The cavalry found itself trapped between 2 walls of flame. Fire ahead, fire behind. Arrows on the flanks. Daniel raised the green flag. Nazira. She was waiting at the gate with 20 fighters. The best. Hamza's men. With sabers. In chainmail. The gates opened. 20 warriors stepped into the smoky strip between the walls of fire and struck the trapped cavalry from the flank. Nazira led the way, saber in her right hand, a shield in her left. She was faster than anyone, stronger than anyone. She was Hamza's daughter, and she was fighting for the home the sheikh had built. The battle in the smoke lasted 20 minutes.
Tariq's cavalry broke. They fled. Through the passages, through the fire, through anything, just to get away. Tariq tried to send in the infantry, but the infantry saw what had happened to the cavalry. They saw the walls of fire. They saw the smoke reaching the sky. They saw the riders running, scorched and bloodied. The infantry did not advance. Tariq stood on the hill and watched. His face was ashen. He had lost. Not because his fighters were weak. They were stronger, more numerous, better armed. He lost because Daniel didn't think like a warrior, like an engineer, who knew that oil burns, that horses are afraid of fire, that coordination beats numbers. Tariq led his army away. Gurab's losses:
47 killed, over 100 wounded, 200 burned horses. Safar's losses: 9 killed, 22 wounded. Among them was Hamza, an arrow in the shoulder. When Nazira led the attack from the gate, he followed her out. He couldn't help but go. His daughter was going into battle. Her father followed. The arrow struck his right shoulder. He didn't fall. He kept fighting, with his left hand, with his saber, until Nazira pulled him back. Maya. Daniel hadn't mentioned her before because she'd arrived quietly, in the 3rd year, small, round-faced, with a doctor's eyes, an American pharmacist of Chinese descent, another immigrant. She'd come to Safar on her own. She'd heard about the settlement where no one dies from diarrhea. Daniel recognized her by her gaze, by the way she looked at the sick, not with pity, with calculation, with the thought of what could be done. Just as Daniel looked at oil. Maya Chen, a pharmacist from San Francisco. She pulled the arrow out of Hamza's shoulder. She washed the wound with boiled water mixed with alcohol, which Daniel had learned to distill from fermented dates. She bandaged it. Hamza lay there, growling in pain. But he didn't scream, not in front of his daughter. When Maya finished, Hamza looked at Daniel. He said quietly, "The boy won." Daniel shook his head. "We won." Hamza closed his eyes. He smiled. That very same smile, an approving one. That evening, Daniel stood on the wall. The trenches were smoking. The smell of burning oil hung in the air. Everyone was standing nearby. Layla with a kerosene lantern, Sarah with a rolled-up map, Yuna with a letter in her hand. She had written her resignation from the League. Final. Nazira with a saber, covered in blood, not her own. Maya with a medical bag, Saba with a pipe in her teeth, and Karim, without a scar on his cheek. Maya had healed it with an ointment of her own making. Daniel looked at them, at everyone, at the city behind him, at the ring of fire below. And he said quietly in English, addressing his mother across worlds, across the impossible, across everything. "Mom, look what we've built." Golden letters flashed above his head. The rank of the state has been elevated. B. A Banu Safar is recognized as a great state of Hashraf. The 4th and 5th years passed quickly, just as years pass when you don't have to fight for survival every day. When you can build, Safar became a city, a real one. Stone walls 4 meters high, a moat on the outside, 6 towers, 4 gates, 3,000 houses inside, streets paved with bitumen, a water supply system. Daniel designed it himself. Clay pipes from the well to the distribution tower, the tower on the hill. Gravity flow. Water flowed to 20 public wells throughout the city. Not to every house, not yet, but 20 water distribution points for a city of 6,000 people is more than in the capital of Al-Darun. There were now 3 schools. Layla managed them all. She no longer taught herself. She trained the teachers. 10 young women and 4 men taught the classes. The alphabet, arithmetic, geography using Sarah's maps, the basics of medicine from Maya, business from Saba, and one subject that Daniel had personally introduced, engineering thinking. problem solving, not magic, not philosophy. Practice. How to build a bridge. How to calculate the load. How to determine where to dig a well. Kareem taught these classes. He was 14. But he knew more about oil distillation and construction than any master in Ashraf. Layla's pharmacy grew into a hospital. Maya Chen ran it. Daniel kept his promise. He built her a glass-blowing workshop. He found sand of the right quality. He found a craftsman from the league who knew how to work with glass. Maya taught him to make test tubes, flasks, pipettes, rough, uneven, but made of glass, transparent, clean. Maya worked through the nights. She studied local herbs, dried them, crushed them, mixed them, distilled them. She searched for an antiseptic better than alcohol. She searched for a fever reducer. She searched for a painkiller. She found them, slowly, bit by bit. The bark of a local tree that brought down fevers, a paste made from desert aloe that healed burns twice as fast, an infusion of bitter root that killed intestinal parasites. Not antibiotics, not aspirin, not penicillin, but better than nothing, much better. The mortality rate in Safara had dropped by 2/3 in 2 years, infant mortality by 5 times. Daniel came to Maya after a particularly difficult day. A child from a new family of refugees, a fever. Maya fought for 2 days. The child died. Maya sat against the wall of the workshop, empty eyes, hands covered in herbal paste. She said that in San Francisco she would have saved him in an hour. An IV, ibuprofen, antibiotics, an hour. But here, 2 days and nothing. Daniel sat down beside her. He was silent. Then he spoke. That over the past year she had saved 400 people who otherwise wouldn't be here. That he was building her a better glass-blowing workshop. In 2 years, she'd have test tubes. In 5, a microscope. They'd get there. Maya looked at him for a long time. Then she quietly said, "Thank you," and went back to work. Because work was the only thing that saved her from the pain. Daniel understood. The same work saved him. Saba had built a trading empire. Contracts with Al-Darun, with the League of 6 Cities, with the Kingdom of Merit in the northern mountains. Kerosene, fuel oil, bitumen, soap, candles. 5 products became 10, then 20. Asphalt for roads, lubricant for ships, lamps, barrels, ropes soaked in fuel oil that wouldn't rot in water. Every month, Saba came up with a new product, or Daniel came up with it, and she found a buyer. They worked like 2 cogs in a machine. He created, she sold. She came to him in the evenings with reports, with figures, with proposals, and with a telephone. They sat on the roof of his house. They looked out over the city and talked about prices, about routes, about competitors, about the future. Once she said he was the first man who spoke to her as an equal, not as a woman, not as a merchant's wife, as a partner. Daniel replied that she was the first partner he trusted completely. She looked at him for a long time, then turned away, took a drag on her pipe, and said nothing. But Daniel saw the flicker in her eyes. At the first Grand Council of the 6 Kingdoms, held in Safar in the 5th year, Daniel introduced Saba first, before introducing himself. He said in front of the ambassadors, sheikhs, and merchants from all over Ashraf, "This is Saba al-Zarif. She speaks on behalf of Safar. Her word is my word." The hall fell silent. A female minister, unheard of. Then they began to speak, all at once. The ambassadors exchanged glances. The sheikhs frowned. Saba stood straight, calm, with a pipe in her teeth. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She waited. Then she began to speak, about prices, about routes, about contracts. And 10 minutes later, the hall was listening, in silence, because Saba knew the numbers better than anyone, and numbers had no gender. Hamza had recovered. The wound in his shoulder had healed. His arm worked. He was training the guard again, which had grown to 150 fighters, with cavalry, with archers, with siege engines, with uniformed chainmail. Not a nomadic army, a regular militia. Something had changed between Hamza and Daniel after the battle. Hamza no longer called him a boy, not even behind his back. He called him sheikh. And when he spoke that word, there was something in his voice that Daniel hadn't heard before. Not respect. More than that. Faith. Hamza believed. Not in the plan, not in oil, not in money, in a man. In the 5th year, Daniel learned a secret. Not the one he'd been expecting. Another one. Worse. Karim brought him a scroll. Old, tattered, found in the ruins of an ancient temple in the desert, which Sarah had discovered during one of the expeditions. The scroll was in an ancient language, one Daniel didn't know, but the system did. Geological exploration highlighted the text, translated it, and Daniel read it. The Safar dynasty, 1,000 years ago, an empire that ruled all of Hashraf, cities, roads, aqueducts, libraries. They were great, and they knew about oil. Knew it and used it. Lamps, roads, weapons, everything Daniel was reinventing, had been invented 1,000 years ago and lost when the empire fell. But that wasn't the main point. The main point was that the oil-bearing strata beneath Banu Safar were no accident. The ancient Safar dynasty knew about them. They guarded them as a strategic resource, a safe, waiting for an heir. And Yusuf ibn Safar, the body in which Daniel lived, was the last direct descendant of that dynasty. The ruler's system had awakened not because Daniel was a stranger, but because Yusuf was the rightful heir. The system had transferred to the body's new master. Daniel wasn't performing a miracle. He was carrying out a 1,000-year plan. He sat over the scroll until dawn, alone, in silence. The lamp burned. The letters swam before his eyes. He thought of Yusuf, of the boy who died defending the well, whose body he had stolen, whose sister he had deceived, whose tribe he had led. Yusuf was the heir to an empire and didn't know it. He died at 20, in the dust, in obscurity, with a spear in his chest. And Daniel, a stranger, a dead American, took his place, his body, his throne, his destiny. He clenched his teeth, closed his eyes, spoke softly into the empty room. Yusuf, I don't know if you can hear me, but I promise, I will build what you were meant to build. And someday I will find a way to give you back at least your memory. At least peace. Silence. The lamp flickered, and nothing happened. Because the dead do not answer. Not in this world, not in the next. The 10th year. The city of Safar. 1 million inhabitants. Daniel stood in the palace balcony. No, not a palace. He never called it a palace. An administrative building, 3 stories, stone, glass, copper water pipes, kerosene lamps on every floor. The roof was covered with bitumen and laid with glazed tiles that Fatima had learned to fire in her 4th year. From the balcony, he could see the city. Streets paved with asphalt, houses made of stone and brick, a market in the central square, schools, hospitals, workshops, glass blowing, blacksmithing, pottery workshops, weaving workshops, a paper mill he had launched in his 6th year, a printing press in his 7th, a library in his 8th, the first in southern Kashraf, 3,000 books, printed, not hand-copied, printed on a press with movable type. Sarah's idea, Karim's execution, who by the age of 20 had become Safar's chief engineer, not by title. In fact, he knew more about oil production, distillation, and construction than anyone in Hashraf except Daniel himself. Paved roads stretched 400 kilometers from Safar, north toward the League of 6 Cities,
southeast toward the border of Al-Darun, west toward the coast. A postal service, the first in the history of Ashraf. Riders on fast horses, stations every 30 kilometers. A letter from Safar reached the League in 5 days. Before, a caravan took a month. 5 oil fields, 2,000 barrels of kerosene a month, plus fuel oil, bitumen, naphtha, candles, soap, asphalt. 100 goods from a single source. Safar's annual income exceeded that of Al-Darun, which had lived off salt mines for 1,000 years. And Safar had overtaken him in 10. Population? 1 million. Not just the indigenous Banu Safar, people from all over Ashraf, from Al-Darun, from the League, from Merit, from the distant deserts, from across the sea. They came because there was work in Safar. There was water, there was food, there was education, there was medicine, there was justice.
The Safar law, written by Daniel and Yuna and ratified by the Council of Elders, guaranteed the rights of every resident, regardless of lineage, tribe, gender. The women of Safar had the right to own property, to conduct business, to study, to vote in the city council. The first city in the history of Ashraf where this was possible. The Safara Charter, signed in the 9th year. 6 kingdoms, Al-Darun, the League of 6 cities, Merit, and 3 small states, all voluntarily recognized Safara's economic leadership. In exchange for guaranteed kerosene supplies, at fixed prices, for 20 years. Not conquest, not vassalage. Partnership. But a partnership in which Safar dictated the terms. Because without kerosene from Safar, the cities were plunged into darkness. Caravans came to a standstill. Ships sat idle in ports without lubrication. Workshops closed. Economic hegemony, just as Daniel had planned. 10 years ago, lying in the sand in a stranger's body with 4 dinars and 312 starving people, Sultan Karam al-Darun arrived in person for the signing of the charter. He was 62 years old, aged but still sharp. The two of them sat on the balcony, drinking tea, looking out over the city. Karam said, "You are not a ruler, Yusuf. You are the future that has come too soon. I envy your grandchildren." Daniel replied that he had no grandchildren. Karam smiled. He said that could be remedied. They were silent. Then Karam asked, "Who are you?" "Actually, you're not the boy I remember from the reports. That boy was weak. You're not weak." Daniel watched the sunset, orange, like a flash on I-10, like the flames of a tanker truck. He replied, "I'm a man who got a second chance and decided not to waste it." Karam nodded. He accepted the answer. He didn't believe it, but he accepted it. They drank tea and signed the charter. That evening, Daniel walked through the city, alone, without guards. Through the streets he had designed, past the houses he had taught people to build, past the lamps burning with his kerosene. He walked past the school. Through the window, he saw children. They sat by the light and read aloud. Their voices were high-pitched, clear, happy. Among them was a girl, a little girl, about 7 years old, the daughter of those refugees he had taken in at Safar 8 years ago. The very one he had picked up in his arms. Emaciated, with chapped lips. The one he had ordered warm milk to be brought to. She had grown up, healthy, strong. She read aloud better than anyone in the class. And on the table in front of her stood a kerosene lamp. That very one, the one he had given to her mother on the first night, so that Mom could sew in the evenings. Mom sewed, the girl read. The lamp burned. Daniel stood by the window and watched. Then he walked on, past Maya's hospital. 3 buildings, 40 beds, a pharmacy, a laboratory, a glass-blowing workshop attached to the hospital. Maya received her test tubes, just as he had promised.
and a microscope, a crude one, with hand-ground lenses, but it worked. Maya saw bacteria under it, the first in the history of Ashraf. She cried, not out of grief, from the opportunity. Past Sarah's cartography workshop, 10 students, the best maps on the continent. Sarah had marked every road, every well, every city in Ashraf on them. Her maps were bought by armies and merchants all over the world. She no longer cried at night. Not every night, but sometimes. When she saw little girls with red hair, Daniel knew. He didn't ask.
He just went into her workshop on those days and sat down silently beside her. He worked on his drawings. She worked on her maps. Two people from another world, in silence, side by side. Past Yuna's music hall, which he had built for her in the 6th year, Yuna played every evening on an instrument the master had made according to her own designs. She no longer spied. She taught at the school. Diplomacy, languages, history, and music. She had found her favorite color, green. The walls of the music hall were green, painted with paint that Maya made from desert malachite. Past the house of Nazira, the commander of the guard, who had grown her force from 50 fighters to 2,000, who had become the best commander in southern Ashraf, who had never lost a single battle. Her father Hamza had passed away 3 years ago, quietly, in his sleep. An old wound had become infected, a fever. Maya fought for a week. She couldn't save him. That night, Nazira came to Daniel. She stood before him, a saber at her belt, her eyes dry. She said her father had asked her to convey one thing before he died. He said he had been wrong, that the boy turned out to be the best sheikh he'd ever seen, and that he was glad he hadn't become a sheikh himself, because he wouldn't have been able to do what Yusuf did. Daniel was silent for a long time. Then he spoke softly, in front of all the elders, in front of the council, in front of Nazira. Hamza knew what he was doing. He wasn't raising a daughter. He was raising an heiress. The tribe sees this. Nazira clenched her teeth. She nodded. She didn't cry. Hamza's daughter. Past the Saba trading courtyard, which never slept. Caravans came and went around the clock, barrels of kerosene, sacks of soap, bales of candles, wagons of asphalt. Saba managed it all like a conductor leading an orchestra, calmly, precisely, with a pipe between her teeth. She had become the richest woman in Ashraf, and the only female minister. Her name was known from the coast to the distant deserts. Her uncle, who had once ruined the Al-Zarif trading house, now worked for her, as a third-class clerk. Saba did not seek revenge. She simply gave him a job, based on his abilities. Right past Layla's house, that very one, the first mud brick house, with a reading nook. It had long since become too small. Daniel had asked her 3 times to move to a bigger house with 2 stories, with a garden. Layla refused, every time. She said her brother had built this house for her, and she wasn't going anywhere. Daniel didn't insist. He understood. This house wasn't just about walls and a roof. This house was about the first time someone had thought of her. Daniel returned to the palace. No, to the administrative building. He went up to the balcony. The city lay before him. 1,000,000 lights, kerosene lights. Each one burned because 10 years ago he had lit an oil film on his finger. System. Rank S. Population 1 million. GDP. The numbers were so high he stopped counting. Golden letters hung in the air. Bright. Warm. He looked at them and remembered other letters. The first ones. Rank F-. GDP. 4 dinars. Population 312. The body of an emaciated boy in the sand. Blood in his mouth. A whitish sky. 3 faces above him. An old woman, a boy, a girl. He closed his eyes, opened them.
The city hadn't vanished. It wasn't a dream. He had done it. Not alone. With them. With everyone. With Layla, who made soap and taught the children. With Karim, who counted barrels and became an engineer. With Rashid, who forged the first chisel from a rusty sickle.
With Nazira, the old woman who was the first to kneel. With Hamza, who hated him and then shielded him from the arrow. With Sarah, who drew the map. With Yuna, who found her color. With Nazira, Hamza's daughter, who led the attack from the gate. With Maya, who saved 400 lives a year. With Saba, who turned oil into an empire. With all 312 of them, who became 1,000,000. Footsteps sounded nearby. Karim, 20 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, no scar on his cheek, with a book under his arm, with a pen behind his ear, with the eyes of an engineer. He stood beside him, looked at the city, asked, "What does the system say, Sheikh?" Daniel looked at the golden letters. Rank S. He looked at Karim, at the boy who had once been 10, who had a scarred cheek and desperate hope in his eyes, who had asked what the mark on the caravan stone meant, who had become his right hand, his legs, his first apprentice. Daniel smiled. "It says we've only just begun, little one. Only just begun." He turned toward the city, toward 1,000,000 lights, and for the first time in 10 years, for the first time since he opened his eyes in a foreign body in the middle of the desert, Daniel Kane fell asleep peacefully.